So we just went live as that door slammed. Perfect time. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Council's Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. Welcome members, welcome council officers, staff members, welcome members of the public, and once again to the millions watching from home. Got a tasty agenda tonight, and we'll dive straight in, shall we? Firstly, declarations of interest. Anybody? No. Cool, we'll move on. Item 2 is looking at minutes. Now, colleagues may recall me raising at the last meeting that I did have a feeling that minutes from the March meeting, which was focusing on bus services, might need to be reworded slightly. And I've gone back and checked how that panned out, and my feeling was correct. I do have wording alternative wording for the 3 resolves from that meeting in March. I will send it to officers if members agree. I'll read each point out, so just bear with me. So on the first resolved, it says the executive member and officers note the accuracy of real-time information. I've put, what else we got? Yes, ask the executive member to consider more robust performance measures in future contracts, including the accuracy of information presented on real-time displays, moving away from lost mileage as a measure of reliability and looking at best practice elsewhere, and possibly publicly highlighting levels of performance by different operators. Not many of you are here for that meeting, so most of you just have to take my word for it, or watch when you get home. Second resolves that I'd like to change, they're not necessarily in the same order, I should say, which isn't helpful. The executive member and officers note the review of performance monitoring and mileages. I sort of covered that in my other point. And then there was one to say the executive member request daily bus passenger information. So for that last one, I've got ask the executive member to help the public access daily passenger patronage data, which an officer in the meeting said was already a possibility and offered to send out information on. And then there was another action which wasn't captured in the original wording of those minutes, which is ask the executive member to instruct officers to work with bus companies to facilitate opportunities for wheelchair users and all other residents to practice getting on and off their vehicles with confidence. Now, I believe an event along those lines did take place recently, but if there's no objections, I'm happy to put those amended minutes forward. Dem services obviously work to a protocol, so my exact wording will probably need tweaking again, but I can live with that. So if there's no objections, I'll roll with that. Thank you all. And the next set of outstanding minutes are from our meeting last month. I'm okay with them. Has anyone got any comments? You all right with that, Councillor Fenton? Nice and easy. Thank you. Right. So that's the minutes dealt with. Thank you all for that. Which brings us to public participation. And I'm quite pleased to see a long list of speakers. Thank you all for signing up. Our first on the list is Gwen Swinburne, who wants to talk about the committee's overall remit / governance. Evening, Gwen. You know the drill.
Sorry, lots of bits today. I'll send them round. Thank you, Chair. I have written to you and some members over the confusing agenda, opaque and annex numbering, and also the fact that a lengthy Appendix B was reissued several days ago with no indication what the officers or you had changed. This is not the way a functional democracy that wants to engage with citizens works. Regarding the proposed consultation for the now what appears 3 strategies discussed today, I note that once again the democratic deficit in the inner wards is exposed, with parish councils per norm getting preferential access, whilst we have nothing in the inner wards. I see I have to keep repeating this to a wall of embarrassed silence every time. We citizens get rather fed up with being talked down to by CYC experts. Can staff please treat us as adults in regard to the name of the council transport conversation? Could you just call it the York transport conversation, not the big conversation? Thank you, it's respectful. I do rather like the candour in the implementation of the consultation plan, but missed the promised Gantt chart. I note in this part of the report, staff has omitted to add the comms with the parish councils. I'm sure that would not have been a deliberate oversight, Chair. I am sure members here will remind you not to forget the essential roles of the lower tier of democracy in the wealthier outer wards only. I do note this time no mention of the now historic Talk About panel. Have staff finally realised after years of not updating it that it is no longer usable? Chair, regarding the sample targets in the anonymous Appendix A, the economic development targets are woeful without any reference to the needs of businesses, including delivery modalities. Who is to develop these and when? On a different matter, the forward plan. I note the now airbrushed highway design guide is added, but not added to your forward plan. Has Mr. Forrest done anything at all? How will this be addressed? Finally, members, the highway inspection manual, extracted only after a warning from the ICO, in the autumn of 2020, it was written, put to executive a whole year later, and nothing since. This is described as, This is described as a living document, yet it is as 2020. It is current. Is it current and fit for purpose? North Yorkshire seems far more specific and current at face. Sorry, Chair, loads of bits there. I'll send it.
Thank you for that, Gwen. Your comments will be taken into account. Very briefly, I should say that I've already raised with Democratic Services privately I never find the diplomatic words to describe it. I will call it the slightly messy presentation of documents for this meeting. You know, there's a move to go more paperless, which I do support, but that's even harder to do if members are having to flick between lots of documents. It's not clear what they are. I'd like one big PDF that is really clear with all the contents in it. But let's see, officers have said they will look at it. I know you've raised lots of other stuff as well, which I can't get into just right now, but you are heard. Thank you. Our next speaker this evening, and I hope I get this right. I say this every time with this gentleman, Mr. Neil McFerrin.
You got it absolutely spot on. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think you're familiar with the setup. 3 minutes.
There you go. Neil McFerrin, Secretary, York Bus Forum. I'm a former voluntary guy, so usually my voice would carry, but anyway. So York Bus Forum welcome and support the new local transport strategy and the fact that it has once again reaffirmed the position of buses in the means of transporting people around the city. We look forward to plans to contribute to extend the network, hopefully to serve those areas currently under provided, quite frankly, by the bus operators. 2 years ago, the city was awarded £17.3 million, thanks to the excellent work of Mr. Ridge on my left here, and also aided by the members of the York Bus Forum. So we had an input into that, but now it's 2 years down the line. We'd like to know how much of the money has already been spent, what has been spent on, and for details of the projects going forward. We asked this last October and have received no update on that. We do need to know what the money is going to be used for, what the timescales are, and what the outcomes envisaged are going to be for this money. It's a huge amount of money. It's a generational change of fortune for the bus services in the city. It's called the Bus Services Improvement Plan. I think it's time that we all got to see what the improvements are going to be. We welcome the recent appointment of an officer tasked to deliver the Bus Service Improvement Plan, But again, wonder why the delay. It's taken 2 years to have somebody in place to do that. As we said at the last meeting, reliability is the key to improving our bus services and achieving the 50% target that is now ingrained in the transport plan. I'd like to know where the 50% started, what the base is for that, but all ambition to improve the numbers of people using buses in the city has to be widely supported and applauded. In order to do that, we must improve the reliability, and the best way to do that is to extend the current bus priority network. This was mentioned at the October meeting, and again, we would like to see and to support and to have feedback on the details of the extension to the bus priority network. The main operator in the city first have on some routes
30 seconds.
Have started use floating timetables. They don't help anybody. We'd like to see them going back to the clock-based timetables. We have a great park and ride system. We'd like to see it used to stop at intermediary stops when other services are no longer being employed, particularly if it's going to run 24 hours a day. We feel it's important for services to connect to the railway station, and we'd like to see the proposal that end. And we want to see a proper bus passenger information centre in the main building of the railway station. We're supportive of younger persons discount, and we'd like to see more of this being used as to encourage the buses as an alternative to car ownership. Bus shelters are still an issue in the city, and we suggest that more effort be put into an urgent review.
Wrap up, Neil.
Okay. Yeah, we'd like to see the buses that were bought with the Zebra money retrofitted so that they can accommodate 2 wheelchair spaces. And we'd like to see the enhanced partnership actually
we are
be an
considerably
enhanced
over,
partnership.
Neil. I could listen to you all evening, but if you want to send that as you've written it to the committee members, that'd be great, because it sounds like you've got plenty more to share with us.
Okay, so I send it to you and
send it to me. That's fine. Oh, we do have a question actually from Councillor Merritt.
Sorry, I was a bit slow earlier. I should have declared an interest, non-pecuniary interest, as a member of the Bus Forum and the Bus Forum Committee, and also the Environment Forum, who all have interests in transport matters on the agenda, and your clean air in terms of the air quality issue. I do apologise.
Apology accepted, Councillor Merritt. It's quite a long list. But yes, Neil, please do send it to me and I'll share it with members. I want to make sure all your points are digested. Thank you. Cheers. Our next speaker this evening is Mrs. Anna Semmelyen. Forgive me if I've mispronounced that. Thank you for joining us. You have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. It's about the transport plan. My name is Anna Semmelyen. I'm a road crash survivor, a traffic reduction and road safety expert with specialism in 20-mile-an-hour limits and Vision Zero. I'm the author of a traffic reduction book called Cutting Your Car Use and former chair of the Scrutiny when it was Economic and City Development Overview and Scrutiny. We know that Scrutiny challenges policy that won't achieve its goals. Whilst there is much that is good in this policy, the transport strategy is not credible at meeting its 20% traffic reduction target. Trends show rising car and taxi use, 637 million miles in 2022. And whilst I applaud the goal, it's not defined as to where and when. Options won't cut 127 million miles to 510 million miles, which is under lockdown and pre-1992 levels. It claims to slim car use without calorie counting. Note the background trends are sharply rising car use, ring road dualling and traffic generators like Herronby and Clifton Moor villages. York cycling has plummeted a third since 2014. Firstly, today, please request a scenario planning impact assessment of cutting car use options urgently for your next meeting. What works is congestion charging, which has been excluded. That would give you 18% less traffic. Major road space reallocation and capacity reduction, like the Lendal Bridge closure to private motor use, this was also excluded, although, you know, I'd like to see more of the bus priority. That would have given you about 16% less traffic. Higher parking prices, reduced Amsterdam travel by 2.5%. You must raise the all-day parking now to as much as you can, £18 an hour and £18 a day and 20 pence an hour. You need major parking space reallocation, but that's been excluded. With strong parking demand, it's very effective at cutting traffic. What is included that needs enhancing? Well, I would enhance the parking enforcement and pavement fines and bans. You need to add staff. That's a quick win. It pays for itself, it adds credibility, and you must keep covering the staff absences. Wide area road speed reduction will raise safety. 20 miles an hour is absolutely essential on as many roads as possible. It will reduce fatality risks 5 to 7 times and help reverse the cycling declines. It gives you a 2.5 to 5% traffic reduction. You should add automatic enforcement average speed cameras with number plate recognition to enforce those limits. Again, that will make your speed reduction more credible. The Vision Zero strategy is correct. You want to aim for 0 road deaths or injuries. You need to add interim pedestrian and cycle casualty prevention targets to that. In summary, please define the 20% less car use in a way that's smart. It needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. 20 miles as a default for most arterial roads, especially where casualties cluster like Fulford and Holgate roads, the station and all the bridges. It's shocking that the station's 25 million scheme isn't 20 miles an hour. Speed reduction on all road classes, including rural roads. Install the average speed cameras, options that allocate road speeds like the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. bus gate on Gillygate and enforcement of bus only on Stonebow. All the options to reduce parking and urgently increase parking enforcement and fees. Invite me to join the expert panel and come and learn more about why speed matters on 9th of November at Cycle and Heaven or online on 23rd of November, and ask officers to attend the 20 mile an hour conference.
Thank you very much for that. May I ask, Anna, forgive me, have you already circulated this speech today?
A slightly modified version of it, yes.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you for that. Cheers. Our next speaker this evening is Mr. Andy Duggan. Good evening, Andy. I think you're familiar with this format. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Firstly, I welcome this opportunity for work on a cross-party agreement on action to cut traffic congestion and pollution in York and boost alternatives to the car. We can now move on from LTP3, signed off over a decade ago by Steve Galloway, following York's longest running scrutiny on transport led by Councillor Merritt. In York, at least, we can have a grown-up discussion on options rather than being pro or anti a specific mode of transport. I should remind everyone that the direct scientific link between the exceptional danger to life rainfall from Storm Babette and carbon dioxide emissions from our badly insulated homes and daily car use over the last 30 years. Cutting all vehicle emissions is a serious and urgent challenge, but one that can bring many health and quality of life benefits. Policy ideas are great, but need to be costed, quantified against clear, specific short-term targets. Tough choices on bus priority are needed to secure quick wins to stabilise the reliability and attractiveness of our bus services. Specifically reference 4.2, the city centre bus study recommendations need to be actioned alongside the changes proposed to Castle Gateway, Eye of York, and the managed reduction in parking so that we can achieve a 20% fewer car journeys. On policy 4.4, the long promised secure overnight and weekend parking must be offered at park and ride sites. Askham Bar could provide a shuttle alternative to the LNER plan to build a new multi-storey car park, which will continue to draw traffic to York Station. Policy 4.7 needs urgent discussion with bus operators for better integration between rail and bus services, such as rerouting the 415 back past the station. On policy 6.2, Gillygate could address pollution and congestion by following the model of Coppergate to become 7 till 7 bus and access only, which would also allow a more pedestrian and cycle-friendly layout at Bootham Junction. Our local neighbourhoods need to be safe walking, wheeling and cycling zones with everything from 20 mile an hour, school streets, covered cycle parking, early morning and evening bus services. These can help to remove barriers to independent travel for young people and the significant proportion of residents who either can't afford a car or prefer alternatives. Policy 3 and LCWIP will set a clear programme for this. And I welcome, lastly, the focus on parking policy, notably 7.6. Res park areas should be focused for car share, e-bike hire, cycle hangers, secure storage, and other such initiatives that help to reduce parking pressures
30
as we
seconds.
cut car dependency. We need to revise the res park process so that terraced streets within walking distance of a city centre can all become protected by the scheme, perhaps with a reduction in annual charge for the first vehicle where there's no option for off-street parking. These are just some of the bold changes that we need now to see embedded by 2027, which is halfway to 2030. Thank you, Chair.
Over time. Thank you, Andy. Again, if you want to share that with committee members, please do. That'd be great, even though it's on public record anyway. Our next speaker this evening is Mr. John Gannon, who wants to talk on the transport strategy and the need to reduce air pollution on Gillygate.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a resident at Gillygate, where I've lived with my family for over 20 years. And I'm also a member of the Air Quality Action Group, which styles itself Love Guildhall. Gillygate is the most polluted street for nitrogen dioxide in York. The 2023 Air Quality Status Report showed that diffusion tubes 7, 13 and 14 all recorded mean annual values in excess of World Health Organization maximum values. And air pollution is getting worse. The Air Quality Action Plan 3 addressed actions in the Fulford and Salisbury terrace areas. We in Gillygate now need some specific actions in the forthcoming Air Quality Action Plan 4. Thank you to the Council for good work done recently by the introduction of electric buses and low emission taxis. Please accelerate this if you can. The October Local Transport Plan, the recently published plan, states that bold action to reduce air pollution will be taken. And we all know that a switch from internal combustion engine to electric vehicle alone is not enough. We need further urgent short-term action as well as medium and long-term action. We support the new local transport strategy and plan policy ideas 6.1 and 6.2 for longer term action. But going back to shorter term actions for your consideration, we believe that the overriding philosophy should be to reduce the density of polluting traffic, which simply means fewer vehicle numbers and less queuing. This should be accompanied by a switch from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles and a drastic reduction in the idling of internal combustion engine vehicles. We note the Council's intention to optimise traffic signal phasing, which currently is being trialled. Residents have already observed that a short red light into Gillygate from Lord Mayor's Walk does indeed reduce queues on Gillygate, but at the expense of increasing queues on Lord Mayor's Walk, Clarence Street, and even Monkgate and St Maurice's Road. So clearly, the full trial will need to be completed and assessed, but simply shifting the problem from one part of York to another cannot be the answer. So, to conclude, we suggest 3 practical short-term actions for your consideration. The first is, please compel all buses and taxis to switch to electric vehicles, particularly including open-top tour buses, which pollute terribly.
Are you able to accelerate this slightly?
Almost finished.
Yeah, okay.
Secondly, penalise if we can, otherwise discourage idling internal combustion engine vehicles. And finally, only allow goods vehicles which are delivering or working in our streets to enter Gillygate. penalise goods vehicles which simply use Gillygate as a shortcut across the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gannon. As I've said to the other speakers, feel free to share what you've written with myself and committee colleagues, just to help hammer it home some more. All right. Cheers. Our next speaker is joining us remotely, and that's Ms. Flick Williams, who wants to talk about the local transport strategy and plan. Flick, can you hear us?
Yes, good evening.
Whenever you're ready, Flick, fire away.
Elected members, these principles and policy ideas sound great in theory, but let's take a look at how they are already being used in practice long before they have come here to scrutiny, let alone being consulted upon or adopted. From the papers that went to the decision session last Thursday, I quote, "In the new and emerging local transport strategy, disabled people are automatically at the top of each mode. So, for instance, disabled cyclists will have priority over cyclists and disabled bus users, but disabled bus users will have priority over bus users." In the middle of this, you have the very deftly done smoke and mirrors trick that inverts the hierarchy. Pedestrians, disabled or otherwise, turn into bus users and back again as they board buses. And this effectively puts cyclists above them, green lighting bus stop bypasses, shared bus borders, and even the latest iteration, backless bus stop bypasses, all done in the name of giving the national cycle lobby everything they want with no compromise anywhere. All the evidence from where these schemes are already deployed is that cyclists do not give way to pedestrians, regardless of markings, zebras, balishas, or warning signs. It further shows that the most vulnerable pedestrians now feel so unsafe they have self-excluded and stopped catching buses. If you are a blind octogenarian, the bus is your only means of transit, sandwiched between EV buses you cannot hear and cyclists you cannot hear. A human rights tribunal in Canada finds them discriminatory and thus unlawful. Research shows disabled people already make 40% fewer journeys than non-disabled people, so I guess we'll be even more heavily represented in the stay home, go nowhere category. I cannot accept that. And the decision session I quote from, the one that took the parking spaces away from outside the homes of disabled residents in Queen Street. The promise was to free up the roads for those whose need to drive is essential. Well, so much for that. If your non-designated reallocated parking in the Res Park zone is 300 metres away, up a hill, across a busy junction, and in front of a busy hotel where I often find the pavement blocked by guests and their luggage. If it's too far for you to walk, what do you do? If you require care visits and carers unpaid for their travelling time, as we know, decline the work because it's too difficult to get to you, which makes it economically unviable for them to take the job. Is this really how we are going to use this transport strategy? To rob disabled residents of their human rights to a private and family life? It's no good tucking it away marked unintended consequences, whilst two families with disabled members are left with their whole lives upended and lying in ruins around them. Perhaps last year's active travel video was an accurate portrayal after all, that of a city socially cleansed of all its disabled and older citizens. Thank you.
Thank you for that, as ever, Flick. As I've said to other speakers, please do feel free to circulate your speech to committee members if you so wish. And thanks again for your contribution. No questions. Our next speaker is Mr. Jonathan Tyler, who wants to talk about the transport strategy and plan. Whenever you're ready, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm a member of the Transport Advisory Group of the Civic Trust. Tony May, Professor Tony May, our leader, is away and has asked me to speak on his and the group's behalf. In broad terms, we welcome this document. It's ambitious, it's interesting, but we have a number of detailed doubts about it. And we're well aware that it's going to need stamina, resources, determination, especially in the light of government objections to the sort of measures that we welcome and want to see implemented. We are a little concerned that, or more than a little concerned, that there are some objective numbers that don't seem to have clear backing. And so we are looking forward to more detailed research and modelling to try to substantiate what's possible. For example, we're aware that the 71% reduction in on climate matters is pretty well determined in broad terms, but it's going to need a lot of careful modelling work to understand exactly how that might be achieved in terms of traffic changes to traffic. It's time consuming and it's going to be costly. And we hope that the council will be clear about the cost of all the work that's going to be necessary. As far as Appendix A is concerned, with the list of objectives, it's at the moment very vague, and we will be submitting much more detailed proposals of what we believe the whole project should be aiming to achieve. In terms of detailed policies, I note particularly policy idea 2.1, maintain York's transport user hierarchy. It's deeply regrettable that that has had very little attention in recent years. Just at the moment, because Newark is flooded, I have to walk through Fishergate. And
30 seconds left now.
That is a pretty disturbing experience. Far from there being a war on motorists, it's motorists with a war on pedestrians in that area. So let's hope for action, radical action of that kind. There are a number of other detailed proposals that the Transport Action Group will be developing, picking up points in the Annex B, and we will be submitting those to you. I'm not going to speak in detail about those now.
Thank you. Yeah, because we are over time now.
Right.
But please do share what you've written and
They're
any
being
further
prepared
thoughts.
by the group at the moment, and they will be submitted.
Thank you. We do have a question as well, if I may, from Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyler. I know you mentioned Fishergate. If you want to email me afterwards about the specific area that you have in mind, or if it's more general, I'm more than happy to focus specifically on that issue as that area's ward councillor when you spoke earlier.
I'd be delighted to do so, but I hope perhaps you might be able to take some action before while we're waiting for the longer term plans, because it's pretty dire at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Tyler, you seem to have struck a chord this evening. I've got one more question for you from Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry. Sure, I didn't really follow the point about the transport hierarchy. When you said about that, and then you said about what it related to in terms of a journey that you couldn't do around Newark Terrace. So I didn't follow that. I'm sure it's just me.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. Pedestrians are at the top of the hierarchy, or supposed to be. But if you walk along Fishergate, by the gyratory, traffic is travelling very fast indeed in huge volumes, and the pedestrian crossing is designed, the sequence is currently designed to humiliate pedestrians. You have to wait a long time. You often get to the middle island, and then you have to wait again. So it's hardly respecting that hierarchy.
Right. I was thinking you were saying we should revisit the hierarchy.
No,
that was what
no, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our next speaker, well, I've got Mr. Toby Oliver down, but I'm not sure if he's here. It's still the case, right? Okay, so we'll move on to the final person on my list, and that's Sharon Cheek, who wants to talk about the local transport plan. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, as a newbie.
Yeah, 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
So this is a statement read on behalf of York Cycle Campaign, and we've also provided some additional comments in writing. York Cycle Campaign welcomes the additional information about the council's plans in the delivery of the local transport plan, but it wants York to have a future as a sustainable, socially equitable and economically buoyant city. And it believes that to achieve this will require measures to dramatically increase the uptake of active travel, particularly cycling, as well as public transport. We're pleased that the policy focus areas contain proposals that, if fully implemented, should enable York to achieve the much needed increase in active travel and public transport. In terms of transport strategy, we welcome the proposals to respect the transport user hierarchy, to move from predict and provide to decide and provide, to embed a focus on healthy and safe streets, and to adopt Vision Zero on road safety. We're pleased that there's now a clear recognition that moving to electric vehicles is not the answer to York's transport woes. As someone experienced who made the change to an EV and then sold it, then if anybody wants any input on that, then I offer my services. We strongly welcome the proposals to create a connected priority cycling network, to upgrade cycling facilities and to reallocate road space to cyclists. These aims, combined with measures to reduce road speeds, are vital to achieve the necessary growth in cycling. We reiterate our view that proposals that focus on culture change, whilst welcome, will not increase cycling unless accompanied by improvements to York's cycling infrastructure. We are, however, concerned that more detailed proposals around the cycle network are far too modest in scale. Much greater ambition is needed to achieve the necessary growth in cycling. We are also concerned that some proposals do not take adequate account of the needs of cyclists. For example, there is no mention of improving cycle access into and through the city centre, and the proposal around speed reduction needs to be very much strengthened. As noted above, in order for the local transport to achieve its goals, the proposals it contains, particularly those around improvements to cycling infrastructure, need to be fully implemented. 30 seconds. Previous local transport plans have promised much but delivered little. We hope will not be the case this time. A great deal rests on the local plan, and as set out, we look forward to continuing our work with the council to ensure that it is robust in its approach and ambitious. We then will hold the council to account in terms of its implementation. Thank you. Not bad on time.
Spot on. Thank you, Sharon. And once again, feel free to share what you've written with myself and other committee members if you so wish. Should apologise as well. I was a bit sloppy on timings, everyone. So that's my bad. But I guess it just means the councillors have to be a bit more succinct this evening. Right. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is not the transport strategy and plan just yet. It's the Finance and Performance Monitor 1. Patrick Looker, are you presenting tonight?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the report presented to the committee covers the Monitor 1 Finance and Performance Report for economy, place, access and transport service areas. It uses extracts of data that was considered by the executive when they considered the first monitor report on the 14th of September. The report provides members with details of the overall financial position of the council, which shows a gross projected overspend of 11.4 million at Q1. This is a continuing trend of pressures that the council has been facing, with particular pressures across adults, across social care services, where demand is increasing, as well as increased complexity and cost of care. All members will be aware the level of overspending is not sustainable, and therefore at the executive meeting there are plans to reduce expenditure, including mitigation of 4.6 million across the service areas. Within this report, from paragraph 21, you'll see more detailed analysis of the financial position across place services. There's a forecast underspend across this particular directorate as parking revenues continue above last year's revenues and also above budget. The section also details the anticipated additional income that will arise from an increase in parking charges, which are due to happen in November. From paragraph 35, the business intelligence team have identified the performance scorecards relating to the old council plan. Members will be aware that there is a new council plan and the key performance data that will be presented to members going forward will change from Monitor 2 at executive in November. There's also an annex to the report. You'll see the long list of indicators which support this scrutiny committee. So members are asked to consider the report and answer any questions that you've got, but please remember the primary purpose for these reports to support yourselves to identify whether there are particular issues that you want to be looking at in scrutiny going forward.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Might any committee members have any opening questions? Blimey, there must be some. I've got plenty. I'll go for Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Patrick. I can't remember where it is, but I saw in here about kind of future cost savings and potentially that looking at further ward budget savings. In terms of this citywide pot that we still haven't got the details around, I just wondered if you thought that would be safe for this year, or is that potentially that it could be used to meet shortfalls?
Sorry, which I didn't quite understand the question.
I think there's supposed to be the ward funding's been split into what we get as a ward and then what we get, or some form of citywide ward funding for schemes that go across wards, but we've not really had the details yet. I just wondered if you thought that might be cut as part of making savings.
There was funding incorporated in the ward committee capital programme was carried forward into this financial year to deliver those highway and transport schemes which had already been approved. We're working through that list. Any underspends that come from that will be going back into the council coffers.
Yeah, I don't think you know what I'm talking about with that sounding rude. This is about this year's ward funding.
This year's ward funding is a different scrutiny committee, so that would be.
So I'm just assuming, but it does refer to ward funding in this report. Does that mean I can't ask questions?
I could ask questions around what can support you in terms of the budgets that go through this particular scrutiny committee.
What budget will the citywide ward funding come from?
That would be within the community's budget, which is part of the.
Okay, that's fine. No problem.
Thanks for that. What you're laughing at, Councillor Mason?
I just tried to get a question, but it kind of just fallen flat.
Well, you'll have another go, I'm sure. Councillor Whitcroft, and then I've got Councillor Merritt. Oh, forgive me, Councillor Merritt. Right, okay, Councillor Merritt.
Yeah, if I could just ask a couple of clarifications. Page 18, the getting around sustainably data, a large number of those indicators, the latest information is more than 2 years out of date. I mean, why aren't we getting more up-to-date information?
Well, as I say, we're updating the performance indicators to link with the new council plan. And so what will be reported to executive at Monitor 2 and will come forward to the following scrutiny will be those updated performance measures, some of which will be the same, but there will certainly be some new ones.
The other question is obvious, the reference to the very large increase in the electricity bills. Is the reason that such a large chunk is in highways due to street lighting, or are there other issues in there?
It's almost exclusively the street lighting contract.
Right. How much of the street lights are now LED? Roughly.
I can't remember.
Patrick's good, but he might not be that good.
No,
Councillor Merritt, that might be something you have to.
And I'm not that good either. I'd be guessing. So I probably will need to come back with a written response on that. We did do a scrutiny on this not that long ago about street lighting, electricity charges, and the relationship between LED. I think we did that certainly within the last year.
Have you captured that?
I'll trawl through the old papers.
Do you have further questions, Councillor Merritt?
Yes, it's linked to that. What scope is there for perhaps more greater use of solar electricity to offset some of these very high charges rather than paying the electricity companies for their direct supplies. Sorry, excuse me, I'm frog in my throat.
So that also was considered by a scrutiny. I'll dig that out and send it through to you, but there was a technical report done that we brought to scrutiny, which looked at the solar technology and where it's at, without wanting to summarise very technical annex that we provided and several hours of discussion. The general premise of that was that at the moment the technology is absolutely there for amenity lighting powered by solar, but the constraints on battery technology are somewhat limited in terms of, particularly at the depths of winter, for 24/7 street lighting. Not 24/7, sorry, that would be wrong, but street lighting when you need it for those longest hours. But I'll dig out that scrutiny as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. I've got Councillor Nelson next.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about the parking, suggestions of increasing parking fees. Obviously, that's come up a couple of times with our public speakers as well today. Has a decision been made on that? And also, it's sort of in the papers, it suggests, you know, that it could be looked at in two ways: a flat increase of, you know, 10 pence per hour, or a full day increase to 18 or 20 pounds a day. Could both of those things be done reasonably? And when will a decision be made on that?
The decision was made at that September executive to increase the hourly rate by 10p per hour and the day rate to £18 a day at standard stay car parks. There's no limit at short stay, so Castle, Piccadilly, that's a flat rate per hour regardless of the day. So that is currently being advertised, I believe, and the plan is to get that into effect from sometime in November.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I ask another one? Thank you. I also, this might be a bit of a niche question, but in terms of the tables with the really specific breakdowns of data, from a wider the place perspective of this committee, I noticed that things like fly tipping are recorded by number of incidents, but I was just wondering whether the data for that could include sort of something around how quickly or how many, you know, how quickly those incidents were dealt with. For example, I just was basically thinking that it's not necessarily a useful performance KPI for how the council is dealing with incidents to count the number of incidents. It would be more useful to count the number of incidents dealt with, perhaps, but it's just a data question, really.
Certainly we can look at, and we will be working with the executive, as Patrick has alluded to, on those performance indicators. The only thing I would say is that indicator is useful when you look at it from a policy context. So quite often when you consider changes to waste collection, changes to household waste cycling, sites open, close, etc., it's useful to be able to say, have the number of those things changed or not? So there is some value in it, possibly to geeks like me, but there is some value in it. But yes, I accept the point you're making about performance data as well.
Thank you for that. On that particular point, Councillor Nelson, and I know that information does exist, and it'd be good to get more on it. So, for instance, for all the fly tipping reports that the NEOs receive, how many lead to enforcement? You know, what does it look like in terms of value for time? These are the kinds of questions that council should be asking, given the financial position.
There is much more data on the open data platform than we obviously produce in the reports for executive, etc. So it is worth having a delve in there if you want. But I'll pick, as I say, we're reviewing the KPIs anyway.
Thank you, James. I have a few questions. And were you raring to go, Councillor Stewart? And Councillor Fenton, I'm happy to wait. People have had enough from me already tonight.
Just indicating rather than raring to go particularly, but I'm happy to go. So it's just on the data point, really. A couple of things. Obviously, we never really use the quarters, do we? So we've got 20 to 21, 21 to 22 to 23, and then we can fill it with 4 quarters, see how things are going, but we never really do that, do we? We're not going to sit here at the level of detail of looking from one quarter to another. So particularly given that obviously there's COVID data in this, it becomes very difficult to find any meaningful trends over 3 years. And so given we've got the data for many years back, wouldn't it make sense to report more years to this committee? It wouldn't be any additional work. It would just be knock out some of the quarter columns that we don't use and put in more previous years, is my comment. And just also related to how we view things, we've got this polarity column about up is bad or up is good. Again, couldn't we make it more consistent so that more of them are just up is bad or up is good, whichever way? So for example, percentage of talk about panel dissatisfied with their local areas of place to live, up is bad for there. But then further on, we've got the percentage of people who say they are they're not experiencing issues with parking, and then we want up to be good. So we can make them both the sort of same rather than have to constantly check is up good or up bad. So they're a bit stato-ish, but
No, all welcome stuff, Councillor Stewart. I've made a note of that. Thank you. Councillor Fenton, did you have a hand?
Yes, please. Just a quick question. Paragraph 22 talks about underspends across waste services from recyclate sales and lower than forecast tonnages. I just wonder whether is that likely? Do we think that's likely to be a recurring sort of benefit, or are there particular circumstances this year that have led us to this quite a good position?
There certainly was a lift in prices primarily in last financial year, and a lot of that was due to coming out of COVID, but also the war in Ukraine, which pushed up commodity prices quite significantly. Those price increases are starting to, well, they've more than started, they are returning back towards the norm, and so certainly the significant underspends or additional income that we've got first part of this year and more last year are starting to wane slightly.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Nelson and then Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I did have one other question, but I couldn't find the thing, and I found it now. In terms of the breakdown, planning services, the income raised for planning services is coming under what was expected. I was wondering if there was any kind of narrative around that, and also whether we predict that the new local plan will change that, because that seemed to be one of the key sort of overspends, whereas lots of things are actually underspending, which is great.
Yeah, planning income often follows the economic cycle to some extent, so we get significant planning income for major developments. There is a bit of a backlog in terms of the major developments as the developers wait for the local plan to come into force, and some of those sites that we would expect house building to come forward, we need the local plan to go. But there's also been a reduction in sort of householder applications as primarily due to the economic downturn and less money being around.
And so just two other things to add. So yes, Patrick's absolutely right. Number of applications tends to follow how affluent people are, and certainly in terms of small householder applications. The only thing I would say is the government have just announced new above inflation rises to planning fees going forward. So they will, I think they come into effect in the new year. So we're just reprofiling that budget.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thanks. And I suppose it almost touches on the next agenda item as well, but obviously with parking charges going up and what our speaker said about that actually having effects in reducing people using cars, I suppose, how do you have that safe calculation in terms of, is there so much we'll stop using, but the net gain still makes it worthwhile? I suppose, what's that balance look like?
Yeah, it is a difficult balance. So what we found from increasing the charges by about 10% last year is we've had a 1% reduction in transactions across the estate and an 8% increase in the income, which suggests there's been a slight reduction in numbers of people coming and parking, but they're effectively paying the additional charges. It's to do with price elasticity and what other alternatives are. When members set parking charges, they just need to be mindful of, are they looking to reduce the numbers of people and transactions coming into the city, in which case income will reduce or stay the same, or are they looking to maximise the amount of revenue, which obviously supports the council's budget? So it's a difficult policy issue for them to consider, really.
Thank you. I have a few questions, if I may. So the first is on a specific. There's a list of bullet points outlining different considerations to help the financial position, and one of them was consider a reduction in expenditure and highways maintenance. Now there's no easy decisions here, and everyone has to get real about the situation. But I'm aware that near the end of the last administration, the repairs backlog for highways was thought to be in the region of £190 million, and that was getting bigger every year. I'm guessing the reality would be a reduction of the expenditure and highways maintenance would see that backlog growth accelerate. We have a nod.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, we're at a position where we need to offer things up that save money. But yes, absolutely, that is, the less maintenance we do, the further away that backlog gets.
Thanks, James. Is it a supplementary, Councillor Merritt? Okay, well, I'll come back after you. Fire away.
The Prime Minister made an announcement at a recent conference that there would be an extra 6 billion for road repairs as taken from the savings from the HS2 stage 2 axing. Have we any indication when that money is likely to appear in local authority budgets, if at all?
Yeah. You can say no.
Well, an announcement to the Prime Minister at a party political conference doesn't necessarily feed into government policy. So it's how that feeds through, and when Department for Transport make announcements of funding coming forward, I'm sure they'll take those things into account.
Indeed.
I'm not aware we've had notification.
Yeah, fair enough. Have Councillor Healy wanted to jump in, and Councillor Stewart? I'm assuming it's about this. Fire away.
Thank you. If you do, or no, if there are in-year cuts to the road maintenance budget and the road maintenance plan that's set out this year, when you do that, can you issue what the new plan is and just inform members / the executive what's dropped off the bottom? I think that would be quite helpful.
Yes. So when we get extra money, we add new things to the programme and we publish that as a decision. If we know we're going to slip things to the next year's programme, we do that as transparently as we can. And certainly they will appear in next year's programme as things carried forward. And that's what you will see in the decision made in February, March this year as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, it was just in terms of the, so we haven't got enough money to service our roads. I can't find it, but there was a line in the data table about the potential for adopting more roads, basically. It was one of the ones we had over different years, number of roads we might adopt and how that changes. So what sort of, what would be the thought on adopting roads at the moment? I mean, obviously developers sort of perceive that, they won't be adopted. So if we can't resurface the number of roads we've got at the moment, why particularly would be looking at adopting more roads, or is that just a total freeze?
I think it would depend on the road in question. So if they are critical roads as part of a development and were developed at an adoptable standard, then we have a duty legally to look at adopting those roads through Section 38 agreements, etc., with developers. Where they are existing roads, I would be wary about adopting them where we are taking on immediate maintenance liabilities. So there is a judging each one in terms of its priority, in terms of what its condition is and what the council's liability is.
Just on, I mean, can you give an example of the sort of road that is in the mix at the moment for we might take it on or we might not, please?
York Central. Those roads are roads that we will almost certainly adopt.
You right with that, councillor Stewart?
I was hoping to be more specific than that, but yeah.
Well, there's not that many roads in the York Central development. He's not talking about the whole constituency. I'm sure we can get into the detail by email outside of the meeting, unless you want to press further. Cool. The reason I raised this issue is not to just bang on about roads. It's to sort of highlight the scale of the challenge. That, you know, that backlog figure that was the case about a year ago didn't happen overnight, and that's just one service area, and that one service area backlog dwarfs the council's budget for everything that it does. And which leads to my next question, which is around communications. And I will bang on about this, but and this is to exec members and any officers that want to comment on it. Is there any scope for a more sort of honest / clear / almost brutal communications program to illustrate to residents just what the situation is? Because I still think there's a lot of people out there that still think local government's having a disco, and it's far from the case in reality. And that's a real source of anxiety for me, as I'm sure it is other members. Councillor Kilbane?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As you know, Chair, we've all got frogs in our throats, so there must be something in the air here. As you know, we are very happy to be direct with residents about the scope of the challenge that we face. I think residents do need to know that as it stands, we are far from being able to afford to repair all of our roads. I hope that the money that was promised is forthcoming. I hope it does make its way to us, and we'll make good use of it if it does. But I think it's bigger than just roads, Chair. So, you know, we've been making cuts to local authorities for the past 13 years, year-on-year cuts. So we estimate the funding gap between what we bring into the authority and what we need to spend to be around about £50 million per year is where the gap is now after 13 years of austerity. And the police department is the department within the council that's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So as demands on our services for old people and young people grow, we have to meet that demand because we have a statutory obligation to look after our old people and young people. And I would guess that most councillors would like us to do so as well. And that means that you have to make cuts in areas that you've got some discretion over, and it's place that faces the brunt of those cuts. So place has been making cuts and savings year on year for over a decade now, which, you know, on one hand, well done to all of the officers for being able to make those savings. On the other hand, every resident can see that on every road they drive down and when they look around our city. You know, we have weeds growing in the city because we have to make cuts, and at the same time we have to look after a growing elderly population and children with very complex needs. That is the harsh reality of what we're dealing with. We are making efficiencies and we are making savings, but, you know, residents can see that, and I think it's really important that residents understand that the primary reason for that is that we're 50 million quid a year short of where we need to be in our budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. I've got one follow-up to that, and I'll come to you, Councillor Healy. Very much appreciate your honest response there, Councillor Kilbane, and I agree with all of it. I guess a question I have, and this might be more for officers, but feel free to take it on if you want, is even if for the next few years this administration makes the best possible decisions around finances within the restraints that we face, the sort of growth of pressures from the likes of adult social care are such that I have a worry that we're never going to quite break out of this, and that even with the best financial discipline, there's still going to have to be more tough decisions and more tough decisions and more tough decisions every year, unless there's a change in national government funding policy for local authorities. Is that a reasonable and fair anxiety to have? Or is it just me being a bit of a, well, a bit negative?
Well, I think all I can probably do is show that a number of other local authorities across the country are having significant financial difficulties. The fact that we've had Birmingham, the biggest local authority in the country, setting out a Section 114 notice, and plenty of other local authorities who have had to do similar, shows that there's pressure across the entire sector. And so to some extent that helps in terms of raising the profile of local government with the wider population, but York and other councils in the region aren't exempt to that, and so there are some very, very difficult decisions that members are going to have to make in the coming months, unless there's significant additional funding coming through from government.
Thank you for that answer. I've heard it described as a doom loop in local government circles in terms of how they're funded. Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, a little bit of context. 15 years ago, when I first joined, I think Councillor Merritt will remember this, there was a scrutiny topic subgroup around highways PFI that had a pot of £1 billion, which at the time was quite a lot of money. That £1 billion would have been enough to catch up just the city of Birmingham. So the highways backlog has existed for a very, very long time in the city. Second question, how much would you have to spend on highways maintenance just to maintain the current status quo? So not to improve it, but just to maintain the current status quo, and how much are we currently spending?
I would need to go back to the figures. I'll be guessing is the honest answer. I can't answer that off the cuff. I'll take it away and come back.
Yeah, thank you. Could you share that with all committee members as well? Cheers. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, it's just in response to Councillor Healy's comment. The highways backlog goes back decades. When we became a unitary authority in 1996, we inherited a significant backlog from the then North Yorkshire County Council. However, at 157 million, the current backlog is many times more, even taking account of inflation, than the backlog that existed then. So it has clearly got progressively worse. Don't think there's much doubt about that.
Thanks, Councillor Merritt. I'm minded to wrap this item up. I don't see anyone pushing for further questions, but I do have a couple of suggested recommendations that they're quite sort of, they're not the most exciting, but they are important. And I'm going off from what Councillor Stewart raised before, which was around the sort of presentation of data. So one was to include more years of data in the analysis of good, bad. Is that fair, Councillor Stewart? And further to that was to try and have some consistency in up means good and down means bad, that kind of thing throughout. Councillor Nelson.
Can I just suggest that it might be a little bit more difficult to change that up means good and down means bad things, because sometimes numbers getting bigger is a good thing and other times numbers getting bigger is a bad thing. It's just a way to help you understand the numbers, but you can't fundamentally ever change the fact that sometimes more children, going without meals is a bad thing, and sometimes more potholes being filled is a good thing. So it just seems like
I have a full appreciation for that, Councillor Nelson, and I trust officers to find an improved balance if it is achievable. Julian.
As one of the councillors, data manglers, could I suggest that you simply remove the arrows and say better or worse?
And those of you that are looking at it in colour, we do colour code it for exactly that reason, so you can see whether it's. I appreciate those of you that rely on paper copies, that may not be in colour, but if you look at it on screen, they are coloured arrows to help with that exact point.
Thank you. We're really getting to the heart of the issue here, aren't we? But I think the thrust behind the point is noted and appreciated. If it's all right with members, I propose we have a short refreshment break. Can we say back here at it's 5 minutes, so 6:45, okay? And then we'll jump into the transport item. Thank you all. Cheers. Okay, so welcome back to tonight's scrutiny meeting. The next agenda item is York's new local transport strategy and plan. A very hefty item, and as mentioned earlier on in the meeting, I have raised a concern around how these items have been presented and how accessible they are in terms of the council website. But nonetheless, really pleased to have the item here. When we did the work planning process earlier in the summer, we wanted to get this really important item on our work plan for this committee in good time to try and influence it before it reaches the executive, and then we're told it's all too late. So pre-decision scrutiny, if you will. But yeah, I'm not sure who's presenting, who's saying what. I'm totally at ease with how officers and the relevant exec members want to play it.
I'll start, if I may, and pass to officer colleagues, and then we'll bring exec members in after that, if that's okay. So York needs to develop a local transport strategy in terms of its relationship with the new combined authority. So the statutory local transport plan will actually sit with the mayoral combined authority. It's important in terms of the development of that York has a strategy and an ask of the mayor, both in terms of what its policies are and in terms of what its pipeline of schemes its ask for funding will be. As I'm sure you're all aware, the government have been promising new guidance on local transport plans for several years now, and that's still not been issued by Department for Transport. And you can make your own minds up about where that's at. I'm not going to make any further comment. Last week before, executive approved the outlines of that strategy in terms of the vision, the objectives and the policy focus areas. And the new administration have been clear that the next step is the detailed policies that sit under that. And those are, or a draft of those is outlined in Annex B. Executive agreed to delegate to the exec member approval of those detailed policies. So that's planned for November, and they are draft policies. So just to stress, and I think it's important, what you see before you now is a first draft, which scrutiny can obviously input into. They will then go to that decision session for approval to go out to consultation, which will then be a consultation right through into the new year around those policies, around pinch points about what schemes should be and other aspects. I think just to finish off before I move on, obviously we've written the paper as a collection of officers. So rather than bring you separate reports on a raft of issues, we've tried to bring them together rather than silo it, because I don't think that helps the discussion. But joined with me tonight are officers that are focusing on the air quality action plan element of our strategy. Obviously, the local transport plan will contribute to that, as will obviously policies that sit within that air quality action plan, as will the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. Obviously, also has a very strong relationship with the local transport plan. I'm going to pass down the line, as it were, to Julian and Michael to see if there's anything specifically they want to ask.
Okay, so I'm Julian Ridge. I look after transport strategy for City of York Council. I think the first point that I would like to add to what James has said is that what we're doing here is we're committing to consult on things. We're not committing to enact these policies. We're committing to a consultation. And I think that's a crucial difference. It's just because something is here doesn't mean it's something the council will necessarily do. And the process involves looking at lots of different options in order to see what the appropriate way forward is. Second, the point I'd make about transport particularly is transport's a really long-term thing. I started my career about 25 years ago, and the other day I was down in Bedfordshire with my son, and I was thrilled to see a construction compound for the first thing I ever worked on, which is the rail project. So things take a long time to happen. Transport in York, I think, is at a bit of an inflection point, and the point that was made in the paper that was taken to executive in February made that point, I hope, very clearly. We have to decide what we do next. Policies and schemes that we're developing now in this local transport plan might be in use in 20, 30 years' time. So it's quite an important point to work very hard to consult very widely to get this right. And we need to do a very thorough consultation to achieve that, and that is set out in this paper. One thing that is an implication of the long-term nature of transport, and I think comes out in a lot of the local debate about transport in York, is that some of the targets and things that we talk about look very stark. So things like a 20% reduction in vehicle miles. But I think one thing that's really important to stress about that is that that is something that's happening over time. And over time, people will leave York, people will come to York, young people will grow up, older people will retire from the job market, etc., etc. And actually, a change of that nature is equivalent to a 2 or 3% annual change over the 7 years that the strategy works out, which, while still a stretching target, is a more digestible one. So I think it's important to make some of these points and provide important context, but essentially these policies are now presented in this report and the way that we intend to consult on them for discussion and prior to the executive member decision session on the 14th of November. So I think we'll now pass on down the line to individual officers to talk about individual parts of it. So shall I pass to you, Mike?
Yeah. Thank you, Mike Southcombe, Environmental Protection Manager. I'm responsible for air quality in the city, amongst other things. This is a draft fourth air quality action plan. The third air quality action plan was based largely on the low emission strategy of 2012. I was looking at how we could shift those people who did not want to abandon their cars and other forms of motorised transport from the traditional internal combustion engine type vehicle to electric and hybrids, and at the same time reduce carbon emissions. We've been pretty successful over the years in reducing pollution, particularly in terms of nitrogen dioxide, which is the main focus of the third air quality action plan. The fourth air quality action plan will continue that focus to try and meet the government's reduced air quality objectives, but also aim to go beyond that to meet both the air quality objectives for nitrogen dioxide, but also aim to meet those for microparticulates, PM10, PM2.5 to use the jargon. The focus of Air Quality Action Plan 4 will be more on the PM2.5, and therefore, whilst there will be a big overlap with transport, as there always has been in terms of air quality, and we will work together with Julian and his team and Andy regarding modal shift policies. What we'll also be looking at are specific policies to reduce particulate matter, and that means looking at combustion, that means looking at domestic heating, that means looking at commercial heating. That also means raising public awareness about the sources of pollution and the impact that choices people make will have on their health. So there'll be a whole raft of detailed policies, as you've hopefully read in the document, and I'll pass on, and people can ask specific questions about those policies should they be so minded. Thank you.
I don't know whether we want to add anything about LC whip or.
Can do. My name's Andy Bowes. I'm the Transport Policy Manager for the Council, and active travel policy sort of sits under me. The local cycling walking infrastructure plan, that's a sort of fairly new concept. I mean, they've not been around anywhere near as long as local transport plans have been, and they were a sort of thing that came out of Boris's sort of gear change policy, where he sought to give active travel a much higher priority. So what each individual local authority has been asked to do is to prepare a policy for their particular area. An LC whip is basically sits alongside the local plan. It's a blueprint for active travel network development for both walking, cycling and wheeling. And we are in the process of developing York's. We have to go through several stages to do that. The first stage being identifying the scope. Quite a few local authorities have sort of had quite a small area that they've concentrated on, whereas York, being quite a small local authority, we've decided ours is going to cover the entire administrative area. The second stage is, and quite a long stage, was to gather all the evidence. So we've commissioned consultants to do a lot of that donkey work for us. They're still working for us. They've helped us identify a strategic walking network and a strategic cycling network. And we've already done one round of public consultation on those networks where stakeholders, elected members and members of the public have the opportunity to let us know what they thought of them and whether we'd missed any obvious bits. And then the next stage was to start to break down those networks and prioritise sort of missing sections of them. We did a similar piece of work to that on the cycle network over the last sort of 10 or so years. So we were slightly ahead of the curve as far as cycling was concerned, but things have changed in terms of policy. So we are having to do differently now because there are sort of guidelines that all local authorities are supposed to follow. So we're in the process of prioritising those bits of network. And then the last stage is integrating that plan with other council policies and plans, which we can't do yet because we're having to go out as part of the local transport strategy or in parallel with local transport strategy consultation to get feedback from a much wider audience as to.
And I think that nicely segues into just flagging Annex C, which is the comms plan around how we engage over the next few months in terms of that extensive and wide consultation. It's much wider than just those policies, I'm sure you can see.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So you've got quite a few papers in front of you that obviously we're inviting feedback on. I think it might be just worth get back to basics really. So what we're trying to do with the local transport plan is we're trying to tackle congestion. We're trying to improve safety so that we don't have as many injuries and deaths on our roads. We're trying to work towards our climate change targets. So sustainability, and also we're trying to stop pollution. We're trying to stop people breathing polluted air. So that's an overview of what we're trying to do. And then for some reason, trying to make people safer, less congested and not poisoned seems to be quite controversial in the UK. And we do see arguments raging left, right and centre, unfortunately, sometimes stoked by politicians, sometimes happening quite naturally. So what we are trying to do here is we're trying to get everybody sort of back to basics. So that's why we have produced a list of objectives and a vision, a list of objectives and a policy focus areas that lots of people have had input to get it this far, and that's cross-party, but also inviting in other stakeholders to say what they think. What we want to do is be really clear on what it is that we're trying to achieve, okay? Because it's more about the ways of achieving those things that all the arguments start to fly around. So what we're in the process of now and what we're looking for from your input is, have we got the objectives right? Have we missed anything? Have we got the policy areas right? Have we missed anything? Are we way off beam with anything? Is this what we're trying to do as a city? And if we can get that basis right, whatever happens in the consultation that will happen early next year in terms of how do we do this, so what changes do we make? Whatever happens in those arguments, and they can get quite heated, whatever happens in them, we've got a solid basis to go back to and say, okay, if we don't want to do this, we still want to try to achieve this outcome. How are we going to do it? So we can try and stay people focused on the positives. So how are we going to achieve those outcomes? Okay, there will be some tough decisions in there for sure. And we're not, this administration is not at all shying away from any of them. We're just trying to make sure that we've got it right, that we've got a broad consensus of agreement on what it is that we're trying to achieve. And then hopefully we can carry that consensus on through the programme. But, it doesn't always happen with local transport plans. So, okay.
Thank you for that, officers and Councillor Kilbane. Very much appreciate how you've communicated that so openly, and I find the ownership of it by an exec member very refreshing compared to previous years where officers would almost do all of the talking. So yeah, let's hope for a useful and constructive discussion. I want to start things off, if I may, with a question, and that is, I mean, obviously there's a lot of work gone in here and we haven't started yet. This is just the beginning of a consultation exercise. But what part of it, and it's massive, what part of it would you or other exec members say, or even officers say, are the bits that you're not most sure, the bits that you're most unsure about or need more work, possibly weakest? Effectively, what do you think you need the most help with from us and the city?
So if you can all just approve it, that'll be fine. No, I think the sort of the objectives are a bit sort of motherhood and apple pie, aren't they? There's going to be, might be some debate around some of them, but I think where most of the debate is probably going to be is around the policy focus areas. So from 1 to 9 in the papers that you've got in front of you. So that might be the best use of the committee's time in terms of looking at those, but obviously it's not for me to say what you want to focus on.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. I have a hand from Councillor Burton. Fire away.
I welcome a lot of what's in the documents this evening. I have some comments to make, and some might be best made separately because I've got quite a few. I noticed things are, there's a lot of inclusion around disabled people and accessibility in here, but I think there could be more. Parking spaces within 150 metres of significant trip attractors. Now, I could park outside the V&A in London. I can also park in the courtyard at the Royal Academy. Let's get ambitious. Let's make York a very attractive place for everyone. Upgrading pedestrian facilities and making them even, I think that's ever so good because, if you go to Parliament Street at the moment, it's like going to the Swiss Alps, negotiating parts of it, especially with my rail later. So that would be a great thing. And I think improving tactile paving for visually impaired people would be a great thing. E-scooters and e-bikes, we welcome those, but we must ensure that they are looking out for pedestrians. And whilst we're sort of on this subject, I think we need to be careful about floating bus stops because they're actually almost lethal. I got out of a bus in Whitechapel in London and nearly lost my life to a bike racing past me. I think, we need to look at that with great care because as Flick Williams said earlier, who is really at the top of the pyramid in this hierarchy? When do you stop being a pedestrian and when do you become a disabled bus user? I think, it's really important to get that right. And it's not just disabled people that's impacting on. If you imagine getting off a bus with a buggy, you wouldn't want to be hit by a bicycle flying past. I'm more for cycling though, and inclusive cycling too. It's just we've got to work out ways of living all together. I noticed Councillor Taylor's looking at the clock.
Well, forgive me, Councillor Burton. It's something for everyone here. I want to, because it's such a big issue, because I'm sure we've all got a lot to say. if we can really try and focus what we're going to say on specific questions, it'd be really helpful.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we'll all give great speeches.
Right,
know,
okay.
Sorry, I know that might sound a bit pushy.
No, but I mean, private hire and taxis, there are just not enough in this city for wheelchair users. That's in here. It's a priority. It has to be a priority. And one last thing,
yeah.
independent safety auditing. Can we ensure that that includes people with who have experience of disability or maybe include disabled people, as happened within the marketing Higgett report?
Thank
And
you.
that's it.
Thank you,
I
Councillor
could
Burton.
go on, but I
I mean,
won't.
look, if you have more to say later in the meeting, that's totally cool. I
Yeah.
just want to keep things focused. I mean, there was a question there around independent safety audits, and I have a supplementary to Councillor Burton's comments, which is on this idea of having blue badge parking spaces within 150 metres of significant trip attractors. Now, I believe that's based on some sort of guidance from another organisation. I forget the name. And me being I guess a novice and someone who doesn't need a blue badge, I thought 150 metres, that's still quite a distance. So I wonder if there's any scope for tightening that up. I mean, could we have 50 metres as a target, to something to aspire to? Just a thought, really. So I guess there's two questions there.
Yeah, I think which are noted, and I think we will have to go away and certainly have a look at. But I think what we need to work to really is the guidance that's out there. So and I think also we'll be leaning quite heavily on the Higgett report that was done around the sort of blue badge access debates that were going on for the last couple of years. And we'll also be using inclusive mobility, which is the government guidance on for disabled access and inclusive mobility in general. And I think actually in terms of the policy areas that we've got here, I think that is actually a weakness. I think that's something that we probably do need to be a bit more thorough on in terms of making sure that we've got policies that we can go back to when these issues arise, so that we've got something that's pretty solid to base our evidence on, or the reasons as to why we doing certain things.
Thanks.
So I'll certainly I'm not an expert on it, but I think it's the inclusive mobility guidance that we'll be looking at, and I think the Higgett report had an awful lot of really good work looking at sort of city centre access that we should certainly be leaning on when we look at the policies.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. Not to be awkward, I think the only thing I'd say back to that, and I know you know this because you'll have come across this in so many different bits of council life, is that often government guidance in particular doesn't necessarily set the bar that it should be, and where we can go above it, we should absolutely do that. But I doubt you disagree with.
I mean, sure, but I think whatever we do, we need to be sure that we can do it consistently across the piece.
Yeah.
So, it might be that we can go above the bar in some areas, but if we set ourselves that level in all areas, then we might come unstuck.
Yeah.
So whatever we do, yeah, obviously we'll do everything we can to the best of our abilities. But in terms of these policies, these are really sort of like a baseline. This is the foundation that we're building the transport system from.
Thank you. Go Julian, and then I'll come to members' hands.
Okay, I mean, I was going to say these are exactly the kind of things that we're hoping will come out through the consultation process, and that is, precisely why we're launching a 11-week consultation on these areas, because that is going to be really important in flushing out the detail and jumping about on the policies and making sure they can withstand that.
Thank you. I think I've got Fenton and Nelson, and Whitcroft and Merritt. I didn't see the order of hands, so can we go with that and keep the peace? Thank you.
That's fine, Ed. How do you want to play? Do you want comments on specific aspects of the paper, or kind of general? Because I've got some kind of general points. We can maybe go into more detailed stuff later. I don't know how you want to handle it.
Whatever you think will be most useful for the time we're all spending tonight.
No, that's fine. So I think certainly my focus in reading this is to give a few steers that can be taken into consideration prior to the consultation. Obviously, we're not here to preempt the outcome of the consultation. That's the whole the whole point. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, some of which has sort of survived from the February the February draft of the outline of strategy. So there's an awful lot of good stuff. I think the terms local transport strategy and plan are being used interchangeably. It'd probably be helpful whether the way I see it is local transport strategy, under which you've got LTP4, Air Quality Action Plan, LC WIP potentially, or maybe I've misunderstood it, but it might be helpful to describe that up front so we're clear, well, what is the strategy and what comes off the strategy. I'll just go on and make the points. They're not really sort of questions as such. I will. Okay, I thought we were sort of feeding back and obviously officers and exec members can comment on that.
You're a very experienced councillor. I'm sure you could fashion your points or statements into questions.
Okay, I shall.
Otherwise, we're all going to be giving speeches tonight. That's my only concern. The time's getting on.
Okay, right. I shall I shall craft them into questions. So would it be possible where references are made to a X% reduction in something for an indication to be given of the benchmark year or what the starting point is? Would it be possible for mention to be made of outer ring road dualling in terms of it potentially being an enabler or a measure that could support more interventions to support active travel within the outer ring roads? If I could ask whether that would be a possibility to be considered. I would ask that in the comms plan, consideration is given to explicitly talking about engaging with motorists as potentially a hard to reach group in terms of some of the concepts that are being discussed here. So if I could ask officers and colleagues involved in the comms work to consider that. And could I also ask, think about the use of the term modal shift. Is there a better way of describing what we mean? Because it doesn't often mean much to many people. Could I also ask that consideration is given to putting an emphasis on movement within communities? There's a lot in here about moving in and out and round and through. I think in a lot of our communities, people would like to move more within their community in a more sustainable manner, particularly some of the sort of secondary shopping and leisure areas. So if I could ask that those be given consideration, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, there's a fine list of questions there, Councillor Fenton. Councillor Kilbane, do you want to respond to any of them?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Oh, do you want to respond this evening?
Yes.
Fair enough. I see. I'm with you. Thank you. Just as I asked for, I've got Councillor Nelson next.
Thank you. I actually have a question, but I think it might have actually been within Councillor Fenton's many questions. So I'm going to kind of pull it back out. There's conversation and there's talk in the kind of policy focus areas around the internal ring road, but I noticed that it had very little specifically talking about the outer ring road. Now, I'm aware that there's a planning application which is kind of due to arrive at some point to planning, so I'm sure that's partly why. But I'd appreciate some comments, if you have some, around how, whether it's not too late, hopefully it's not too late, or how this can and might feed into what is proposed for the outer ring road. You know, as living in a ward like Westfield, it's basically impossible to get somewhere like Clifton Moor in an active travel way, even though they're not that far away. So I just appreciate some kind of comments around how this and that are going to link together.
Yeah, sure, and we can certainly take that on board, because obviously with the York Outer Ring Road dualling, there's an enormous amount of active travel infrastructure being built alongside it, and it will also have implications for travel within the city and within communities as well. So yeah, absolutely take that on board.
Thank you both. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just two questions on two different areas. So on page 49, policy area 7.6, discussion around residence parking. I appreciate as a policy idea. I would like to know whether you envisage the use of residence parking within this wider strategy to be implemented via the current long form route that it currently takes, or would it be implemented via a different approach, perhaps more centralised approach? And if I can just ask another question in addition, Chair, page 44, policy area 4.10. Can I just ask, has there ever been any considerations for water-based transport in York before? And is there any legacy policy that we can look into or information we can have on that? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think you can't really do a transport strategy without looking at parking in the round. It's a fundamental part of any transport strategy. So that means all parking. And I think what I would like to do, and I think, as a city, we're probably ahead of some other places, and I think we're all sensible enough to actually have that conversation about how do you want it to work? Is it working now? I know certainly as ward councillors, those ward councillors that have got residence parking, you'll be familiar with residents asking you for a res park scheme, and maybe 2 years later they finally get it because of the way that the current system works, because of resources, etc. So I think I'm very happy to look at all aspects, and we look for people to make suggestions in terms of how they think those things should work. Water-based transport, in other words, sort of a water taxi from Rawcliffe or wherever. I think we would have struggled in the last week a little bit, wouldn't we? Or got here very fast, that's for sure. Then, I mean, I think it is certainly something that it's a perennial, isn't it? It comes up and it goes away, and comes up, goes away. So, I mean, I think again, this is the opportunity for us to have if people suggest it, if it seems something that people are interested in, think it can work, we get some sensible proposals. Of course, it's something that we can look at.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Next, I've got Councillor Merritt.
Yeah, it's really pleasing to see that this document. It's a long time since the LTP3's short-term 5-year plan expired, so getting an update's extremely welcome. I'm also very pleased to see the annex on the consultation, which looks very comprehensive, and I think is an important part of it. But I think one of the issues is, if we are going to achieve some of the targets in here, we need to take people with us. If we're going to persuade people to choose different options, we both have to provide those better options, but we also have to encourage and so on. So I would have thought a key part of a transport strategy would also be about that ongoing engagement and communication with the public in terms of achieving the objectives of this plan once we've got their agreement to what that strategy and plan should be. If I go on then to
Councillor Merritt, just to be fair, can we try and zoom in on questions, if we may? This is all very interesting, but there's plenty more members, and this is a massive item, so I want to keep it as tight as possible.
I think just to come back on that, then the consultation is this first phase of consultation, this through to the new year, is designed to be an iterative consultation. So it's not, it will go through a series of cycles in terms of what we're asking.
I'll put it in the question form this time.
Yeah. Well, it's
we know
the main reason why we're here.
Yes.
I know I'm being a bit pushy, but
on bus services, we know that the success of London was built round some particular features: single ticketing system, maximum daily fares, and other, integration of timetables and so on. None of those things specifically appear in the detailed policies. Now, I think they're actually covered in the BSIP, but I think it would be useful if they were actually also in the policies, so that we make sure we actually get people's endorsement for that approach, or otherwise, if you'd be willing to take that on board.
Yeah, I was going to say there's been real tension in writing this, because obviously there's loads of transport stuff going on in York. I mean, if we did nothing, we would still end up rebuilding the station and electrifying the bus fleet and putting in the BSIP and so on and so forth. So there is a number of times there have been judgments that have had to be made about do we put stuff that we're doing anyway in the consultation, and that is an example of those kind of measures. I mean, we've got no problem in putting stuff in if it's the way to get it endorsed, but in some ways we're probably more likely to put that kind of thing in the text that sits alongside the consultation to show what we are already doing, to make it easier for people to use active and sustainable modes of transport.
Councillor Nelson, did you have a supplementary on what Councillor Merritt was?
I had a supplementary on the things around comms and consultation.
Yeah, okay. I'll come back to you, Councillor Merritt, if you have more.
Just one thing that really stood out for me in this is there's on page 54, there's when discussing the consultation, there is a paragraph that says, it is often said in consultations that some groups are hard to reach, but this doesn't have to apply to us. And I just think, while we're talking about kind of the consultation and how important it is, this will always apply to us. And it just slightly concerned me, some of the language in this. I know it talks about how this is an opportunity to reach people that we wouldn't normally reach, and you're absolutely right, it is an opportunity. And I'm pleased that the council feels that progress has been made in terms of the success of consultations, but I think that it's really important to not let that make us lose sight of the fact that there are many people in this city who this consultation will not reach, and that we need to make sure we're not being complacent about that, and that we are going out to those people and those communities. So
thank you. I have a supplementary to that supplementary, if I may. Better than coming back to it later on. I had the exact same thoughts. So my question is, can we as a council add to the current comms and engagement plan to how do I put it, to try and find the types of people who just instantly dismiss anything the council does as the council are at it again. Can we go into pubs, community centres, churches, car parks, shopping centres, petrol stations? I mean, there's already a list of some locations in here, but I think we should really max it out, because what that will do, I think, in the long run is sort of hopefully dampen down some of the "you never listened to us, you never spoke to us" type of narrative that that hasn't been helped by recent press releases around secret plans for ULEZ, which is just an utter nonsense. So again, to come back to the question, can we significantly increase? So there's a bullet point, that says create posters and advertising materials for libraries, gyms, leisure centres. Can we build on that to add in all those other places and include sort of face-to-face conversations? I know it's all a resource question, but we've got to max out and then get out there across the entire city.
Yeah, just I mean, the reason that we are using those words is exactly to avoid complacency of saying, oh, those people are hard to reach, oh, they're always a hard to reach group, whereas we're saying, no, actually, we just need to go to them wherever they are. So all of the areas that you're talking about, sure, are all on our radar, but so are school kids. We never get consulted in these things, but actually they're the ones that we want to know why they're not getting the bus or walking or cycling to school. So we're trying to get out of that mindset, and we're trying to get into a mindset that says, let's go to where people are. So yeah, obviously take all that on board.
Thank you, Councillor Cobain. Councillor Villiers.
Just wanted to come in with a suggestion that has occurred to me. In Leeds, when they did transport consultation, they analysed all the groups that they did manage to reach, and then they said who was missing. And then they went and found who was missing afterwards. So I wonder if we could replicate that, where we go, oh, we've missed people in that demographic or people who live in that area afterwards. And if that's too big a ask, I don't know. It's an idea.
It's a welcome idea, Councillor Villiers. Julian, and I'll come back to members' hands.
I was just going to say we would tend to do that as standard practice anyway. If you look at our big conversation that we did, exercise that we did in 2021, we adopted exactly that methodology. So we identified who was missing from who we'd spoken to, and then we went out and convened focus groups, and so on and so forth. So it's a legitimate way. We would always do that.
I appreciate the response, but I think a lot of members would challenge how that plays out in reality on the ground. Because I think there's a lot of residents who can legitimately say the council doesn't properly engage with. But look, I'm getting into speech territory and I shouldn't. Councillor Mason, was yours another supplementary around this?
About the consultation, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
One thing, if I've read it right, is there was no option to respond as a councillor. It was council officer, but there was nothing for councillor. So I thought that would be useful to add in if we could. And the other one I was thinking about was videos and how you kind of make this more interactive to hit some of those people, because actually you start reading the consultation summary and things, and it's very easy to get lost in it and switch off. And I think Councillor Taylor's right about actually being out there and talking to people in person, and particularly, you know, you're saying about commuters and people coming in, travelling distances, going out to the East Riding and sitting in Pocklington and Beverley or wherever else, and talking to people at bus stops that are getting buses in and talking about how they commute. I think that'd be really important.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Merritt, we're still on you with the main questions. And in the queue, we've got Councillor Hook, Councillor Mason again with a, okay, you're sorted now. And Councillor Healy after Councillor Hook, and then Councillor Stewart. Councillor Merritt.
I do have some particular observations on the air quality action plan, but they're not a question, so I'll take them up separately later. But the question I do have, two of the public speakers early on raised questions about whether the policies here are going to be sufficient to achieve the targets that were laid, that are being proposed. And I was wondering what modelling has or is going to be done later as part of the movement and place plan to try and address those challenges, and to be able to be sure that we have a strategy and local plan, transport plan, that will actually have a reasonable chance of delivering the requested outcomes.
In terms of the sort of modelling, I'll hand over to Julian on. But I think the next stage, once the objectives, policies are all agreed, is actually deciding what the metrics are. You know, so there's been, the question's been asked, you know, what's your baseline, you know, that we're measuring from. So agreeing that, and then agreeing how you will measure that each of those policy objectives are being met. Now that will obviously include some form of modelling, but it might be all different kinds of measures that we use that haven't been decided upon yet. There's obviously, we give some thought to them, because we're not just standing still on this. But once this is agreed, then we need to decide what the metrics are, and that's, you know, and what the targets are in terms of those targets. How are they staged, for example? You know, over what periods are we measuring? So all that work needs to be done. But I totally agree with you, Councillor Merritt. If we don't do that, then it is sort of whistling in the wind, really. So that's the next important stage in the work once we've agreed the basics.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Merritt, do you have further questions? We can come back to you if you want a little break. It's up to you.
Well, as I say, I'll take up the ACAP issues directly with the officers.
Okay, thank you. Which brings me to, do we have an officer hand? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, in regards to the modelling, we've engaged WSP Consulting alongside North. To some extent, we work with North Yorkshire sometimes, because the final local transport plan will be something that's submitted by both us and them through the mayoral combined authority. So through that, we have commissioned WSP to do quantified carbon reduction modelling for North Yorkshire and for York. The work's at a relatively early stage at the moment, and we're assembling base data to sort of inform target development and what we can do going forward.
Thank you, James.
I think just to those of you that have dealt with local transport plans for a long time, I think we need to reposition ourselves a little bit. The targets we are setting ourselves are very different to the way local transport plans have historically been written. We are going to need much tighter feedback loops. So yes, we can model impacts, but actually we're going to have to be, as Councillor Kilbane alluded to, measuring those targets we've set ourselves to make sure that our policies are keeping us on track. Because actually what we will need is quite regular feedback loops to go, are we on track or are we not on track? And therefore, are the policies correct or not? And that's going to have to happen in a much more dynamic way than writing a local transport plan every 10, 20 years. In reality, we're going to need to be much more agile in terms of how we keep this under review than historically.
Thank you, James. Councillor Hook, thanks for your patience.
It's all right, thank you, Chair. In the light of one of the comments that James made right at the beginning, that in fact this transport policy is for when we get the mayor and the combined authority, and the fact that I've always been harking on about I want buses for my rural villages and they live on the edge. Could there be a part in that plan where there could be synergy between York and North Yorkshire, say buses coming in from Harrogate, buses coming in from Selby and presumably the other side of the town as well? Just so that we can get these better bus services, because I'm really worried that unless you have more carrots, the less well off are going to be trapped, because if it's all sticks, it's horrible. And I'm always there for the underdogs. So
yeah, so I think that's absolutely true. I mean, one thing that's really quite interesting is I'm working quite a lot with the North Yorkshire officers, and obviously they are dealing with places which are very different from York and places which are actually maybe not that different from York. And we do, and it does allow us to look at cross-boundary measures much more. So I would hope that obviously it will be very dependent on the political complexion of the mayoralty and what the mayor's own priorities are. But a mayor who wished to focus on rural areas and improve bus services, they in North Yorkshire are always telling me that the thing that comes out of their public consultation as a priority to improve across North Yorkshire is the bus service. So you would hope that there are improvements there that can be delivered.
Supplementary?
Sort of supplementary about cross frontiers as well. The other thing that would be absolutely wonderful, given that there's that big development in Hamilton, to actually get a footpath going down the A59, because that would also help on the people on this side of town, my side of town. But and the other thing is, will it be all right for me to add a lot of things that are more specific to the rural areas, because I think some of the rural areas have been missed a bit. Great, thank you.
You definitely want ward councillors from all over the city to feed in, I think. I have a supplementary to what you're sort of getting at with North Yorkshire and York, which is, I'm hoping officers can give me some peace of mind on this, but let's say we do all of this work and we get a great local transport strategy and plan. Then we elect the mayor for the combined authority who just doesn't like it. Is there a risk that all this work effectively can be written off, or do we have some degree of protection that even if they don't like some bits, we can still do other bits? Trying to think a few years ahead, really.
Yes, I think the key transport decisions that are made at a mayoral level won't just be made by the mayor on their own. So there's a governance structure that involves representatives from the two unitaries, ourselves and North Yorkshire, so that the way that will work is we do have a seat at that decision-making table.
And just sort of politically speaking, it would be really foolish of a mayor of York and North Yorkshire to ignore the wishes of the places that they were the mayor for.
Quite, Councillor Kilbane. Next, I've got Councillor Healy. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mine is actually now supplementary to Councillor Merritt's point that he raised slightly earlier. So this probably is for you, Julian. Picking up the point that the speakers did make, and picking up the point that you made about a 2% reduction per year over the 10-year period. Do we have any examples of other cities that over a 10-year period have managed to reduce traffic by 20%? And what measures did they use so that we can at least put those measures into this consultation? Because I personally can't see how these changes are going to drive that level of change.
Well, I think that, I mean, that's $1 million question, isn't it? Certainly you can see examples of cities that have achieved that level of change in relatively small areas. And in York, the amount of traffic that's over the city centre bridges is now 30% lower than it was in the 70s. So it is not that difficult to find instances where traffic levels have reduced. I think we should remember also that the context for local transport planning has massively changed. You know, the onus for local transport authorities to reduce car use is a very recent thing. So we wouldn't expect to find examples from elsewhere, because we're trying to do things which nobody has ever really tried to do before.
I mean, this has happened all over Europe over the past 10 years, and there are plenty examples that we could take from Europe. But as we have to go to on these field trips and pay for it out of our own pockets, we probably won't be going to Seville or somewhere like that that's currently on with it. However, you know, this has been done in places like Waltham Forest, which is slightly more affordable for me to get to. So I might be going to have a look at those kind of places. They're currently on with some really imaginative projects in Leicester, even cheaper to get to. So I can, you know, they're places that we'll be looking at and working with. We've talked to transport representatives or transport officers in those cities as well. Most UK cities are at the early stages of this programme. There are a few that are further ahead of the game, and we'd certainly be talking to them. The issue, though, is that no two cities are the same. So what works in one city won't necessarily work in another. What would work in, you know, in a medieval city like York is not necessarily going to be the same as what works in Leicester, where they've got wider streets, for example. So, you know, we'll learn from where we can, for sure. And there are other people who are further on in the journey from us that we are talking to and will continue to.
And just to reiterate, as officers, we have close working relationships with some of those cities you mentioned. We have a close working relationship with Oxford. As ever, you would imagine, we learn everything. So what has worked and what hasn't worked, and the pitfalls and traps they've fallen into, and hopefully we can avoid.
Thank you, Councillor Healy.
Very much, Chair. So coming back to Leicester and Waltham Forest then, what have they done specifically to get, you know, going back to your $1 million question, what have they done that's driven down car usage? Because that seems to be the target. There's a very specific target around car usage. So, you know, what have they done?
So in Waltham Forest, they reallocated road space to sustainable travel and to active travel. And in Leicester, they've done a little bit, well, they've done quite a bit of reallocating the road space, but they've invested a lot in active travel infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. We got there in the end.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I think you're next, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Loads going on. And I don't want to give a speech and obviously keep my questions specific. But I do feel that Councillor Fenton made a very good point about the whole, you know, where does the car user fit in this and the road user? And that's partly in the consultation, because they'll be the people giving their views on the press comments or in the pub and everything like that. So we need to think about that. And I think Councillor Hook made a really good point about, from the rural point of view, what some of the things that would be great to see in terms of buses. Because I think, you know, too often we're in a world called York, and outside is a world called North Yorkshire, and we've got to be joined up. If we're not going to be joined up with this, then when are we? And I suppose it sounds like it's a bit of the powers that be say, York, you need to get your transport strategy. North Yorkshire, you need to ahead of the mayor all coming together. Whereas, you know, really it would almost be better having the mayor and everything like that to get that joint vision. Because I think so. Just on buses particularly, 95% of buses on time. Yeah. What's on time defined as? Presumably there's some sort of 1 minute, 2 minute tolerance.
So the traffic commissioners have a very precise definition of this, which is it must be no more than 1 minute early or 5 minutes late. That's called a 6 minute window. And then there is a complex set of measures related to whether that is taken at the start and the end of the routes, whether it is taken at the timing points through the routes, or whether it is taken at every single stop.
Okay, fine. Because I think, yeah, that's one of the great examples of the difference between, you know, a rural, you know, I mean, I'm just very conscious that the transport plan outside the ring road is a world apart, isn't it? You know, I mean, you're not going to see the reductions in road usage out of the ring road as you are in the city centre, and you know, and those sorts of things. And so buses, for example, in Cottonthorpe, you know, we have 2 buses an hour, not great on evenings, not great weekends. And when I came in on Saturday night to York on the coastline, for the first ever time, it was bang on time in the limited number of times I've done it, and it literally followed the other. The coastline followed the connections bus for parts of it. So you know, one of the it talks about access hubs, park and rides. They're not. I'm not reading that rightly. They're not taking people to the park and ride, are they? From it's what you can do when you're at the park and ride. Is that right? And
yes, I mean, there's an intent. I mean, it's something that we're actually doing through the BSIP. There is an intention to develop the park and ride sites so that they offer more sites. So you would, for instance, be able to rock up at the park and ride site at Askham Bar and catch bus to Leeds.
All right. Okay. So what was that? Yeah.
So I mean, I think this. I think, Councillor Stewart, you and I might actually have a difference in view about the rural areas, because one thing that's very clear about the city centre in York is that sustainable and active mode use is already very high. Therefore, there is more scope to probably reduce car mileage by improving the options for people who currently use their cars a great deal and live in the suburbs and the villages around York. So, you know, there is more scope there. And I think there is an opportunity through this local transport plan to look at that. I think it's also important. I mean, we talked about this 2 or 3% reduction in car mileage. Now, the average car in this country does about 10,000 miles a year. So a 2% reduction in that is 200 miles, which is the same as a return trip to Newcastle. And that's over a year. So it's not, you know, it's not a big number.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree with you on that. You know, that is obviously where the potential is. And I think that's what, you know, I'd be very keen to see. So I would agree with that, certainly.
And just on the sort of the political point about the morality, I mean, we are looking forward to working with new mayor. And I mean, you know, given that it's North Yorkshire, it probably will be a Labour mayor. But you know, we do whatever colour the mayor is, then we are very, very happy to be working with them. But you know, in terms of I think you're right, Councillor Stewart. I think for rural areas, then buses will be absolutely key, and people will only use them if they run at times when they want to use them, and they're reliable. You know, reliability is the number one issue why people stop using buses, because they go to the bus stop, doesn't turn up, they get fed up, I'm going to drive, I'm not going to do that again. It's like any sensible person would really. And to do that, we need to tackle congestion, because that's what causes buses to be unreliable. Is they get is the fact that they get stuck in traffic. And I think it's also, you know, in that vein, I don't think it's helpful for us, and we're certainly not doing this in our thinking, to sort of divide groups up into drivers, bus users, cyclists, walkers, because we're all of those. All of us are all of those things. What we are going to try and achieve is to make it easier to take the more sort of sustainable route that help people not add to the congestion or add to the pollution, by giving them sort of easier choices to make in terms of how they travel. That's kind of the aim of it. I think it's important we stay focused on that. It's about congestion, pollution, casualties, and climate. That's what we're trying to tackle.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Just a quick question around policy focus area 4, which is improving public transport. Can I ask officers consider making reference to the network review, which may pick up some of the sort of the sub ideas around creating comprehensive network of bus services, and think about someone might read the upgrading high frequency bus services as meaning, well, will that be at the expense of other services that are perhaps not as frequent because they don't serve as large population? If you can give some thought to how to ensure that isn't misunderstood, because I'm sure that's not the that's not the intention. But I know, just talking to a few people, they thought, oh, does that mean that is at the expense of? If those two things could be considered, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fenton. I'm assuming that's fine, given the lack of a response verbally anyway. I have a question which is around how all of this links into, trying to find the correct terminology, but we have the speed management protocol, don't we, where the police are quite involved with us, and the data they have and the data we have leads to decisions about what may or may not happen in communities. And from my experience as a councillor, their input hasn't always been helpful. So, you know, the police contribution to a speed calming decision on New Lane was to argue against some of the speed calming measures proposed. So I guess where I'm going with this is, it would be really frustrating if we end up with a very progressive, positive transport plan and strategy, but the police aren't with us on that. Are they sort of plugged into this process? Can they be?
They're not currently, sorry, they're not currently plugged in, and absolutely welcome all of the contributions. I think, you know, what we're trying to do is create a plan for the whole city that's about transport, it's about movement, but it's also about place. So what a place feels like once you're managing your transport systems well, and that is a step away really from just thinking about speed in terms of casualties and enforcement, which is the way that the police and traffic officers tend to think about it. I'm thinking about it in terms of, well, we don't know. We'll have to do. Hopefully, these questions will be asked in the consultation and they'll emerge. But you know, why is it that your 12-year-olds can't cycle to school on their own? You know, and that may be it's got something to do with the speed of cars or whatever that wouldn't normally factor into police thinking, because police look at potential to enforce and number of casualties. You know, whereas actually we're trying to create spaces and places that people can move through easily. And that's a broader concept than the way that these things are normally judged by traffic enforcement.
Thank you, James.
Just to follow up on what Councillor Kilbane said, I was about to say pretty much what he said. He might have been about to say what I am about to say, which is, of course, that the new mayor is the equivalent of the police and crime commissioner. So actually, there should be more joined up thinking going forward, that if we've got a transport policy with a policy around 20 miles an hour, it'll be that same person tasked with managing the police to deliver it.
Thank you. Good point, James. Councillor Nelson, and we'll wrap it up shortly.
I just thought I had a question also about within policy focus area for the reference to possibly light rail transit systems or bus rapid transit services, which, as someone that doesn't speak transport plan, don't really, what does that mean? I'm just reading some sort of like super zooming bus that, I don't know, doesn't go near any cars, or trams is what I read those things to mean. So it would probably be great if someone could just explain a bit more the thinking of possible avenues that you'll be exploring with that? Thank you.
Julian?
Okay, sorry, transport is super full of jargon, which never helps anyone. I suppose what we're getting at in that is the idea that there might be something that you do in York with public transport that is a bit more than the conventional buses we have at the moment. And bus rapid transit or light rail transit or very light rail transit, there are, 120 different names for these things, monorails. They are all ways that could be done.
So what's the kind of, like, realistically, what are the chances, or how much are the council realistically likely to be looking at something like, say, the trams in Manchester or light rail, and what's the difference between a normal bus and a rapid transit bus?
I think realistically, rail is incredibly expensive. That doesn't mean that in trying to achieve these objectives, we should take it off the table. But we need to be realistic. It is going to be incredibly challenging. What is much more achievable is bus priority measures that allow the bus to be quicker than the car. That makes it much more attractive. So it's looking at things like that will actually speed up those bus journeys and make that a more attractive proposition for people trying to get into the city.
Would that include measures like 2+ lanes? Would that include measures like 2+ lanes as well? Joint bus 2+.
Potentially, yes. I mean, there are all those sorts of things that we could look at.
But just to be clear, rapid transit bus is just a bus, but it has a better way of getting into town.
Well, it depends what it is. I mean, Cambridgeshire has rapid transit buses running along old railway lines right into the city centre. Using gas-powered and electric buses. But other bus rapid transit systems are much closer to, what you'd think of as a conventional bus. And under some definitions, now that we've electrified it, our park and ride network is beginning to look like a bus rapid transit. So it's, I mean, it covers a sort of multitude of sins, really. But it is. Generally, it is something more than a conventional bus.
And I think, the reason that's there to go into the consultation is that we do want to stretch thinking as well. We don't, and we want to be ambitious. We know that we won't be able to afford everything now, but we've got a whole load of new developments being built on the edge of York. And if we lived in a sensible country, part of that development, they'd be connected by a tram so that people could move, or light rail, or whatever you want to call it, so people could be moved very quickly from where they are into the city. But it might change, and we might be able to get funding for those kind of things. We haven't at the moment, but just because we haven't doesn't mean we can't be stretching the thinking. However, with all of these things, you prioritize them, don't they? And we're not going to sacrifice everything to get a tram line. We're going to do the things that we can do with the budgets that we've got.
I do think there's an important point here about language and accessibility within what goes into that consultation in that case, and being really clear about that.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I should say, if you cycle hard enough, you can have a rapid transit bicycle. Julian, you had a hand. Councillor Merritt, I will come to you.
I was just going to make one last point, which I've kind of already made, but I mean, this is a long-term strategy. So, might not be appropriate in the next decade, might be appropriate in 20, 30 years, we don't know. And also the technology is constantly changing and evolving. Coventry are introducing, I think, something called very light rapid transit, which is a narrow gauge battery powered tram that operates in the middle of Coventry, so it doesn't have the paraphernalia like catenary and things like that. I mean, these are changes and real things coming forward, which we might want to use somewhere in York. I mean, even if it's just connecting the university to one of the new developments.
Thank you. Come to Councillor Merritt, and then I'll try and wrap this up and come to recommendations, if that's all right with everybody. Councillor Merritt, thanks for your patience.
My other points being picked up subsequently.
Fair play. Nobody else? Councillor Burton? No. Okay. Right, so there's been a lot of comments, questions, the executive member and officers or members, executive members seem to be happy to take all of it on, but I do think for formality, we could do with nailing some things down. And I'll need colleagues' help because a lot's been said this evening. So I want to go down a list of recommendations for the relevant executive members to consider in liaison with officers. If you think I've missed anything, colleagues, please put others forward. Councillor Fenton, I know you had a flurry of suggestions earlier on, which were very fine questions too, and I want to capture them. So the first point I've got, or first recommendation, is to ask the relevant executive members to work with officers on expanding the comms and engagement programme to include more locations and face-to-face conversations with hard to reach, seldom heard groups, however we want to define it. I don't want to get bogged down on exact words, but I think the points we made earlier were fairly clear in that regard. Any objections to that, colleagues? Cool, thank you.
Would you consider adding in something around accessible language and just revisiting some of the language as well?
Yes, that was on my list, but it's part of it, to be honest. So yeah, we can work into that and attempt to bust jargon and have accessible language throughout, including videos and pictures. Probably worth using the average national reading age as a sort of useful starting point, which I think is only around 10 or 11. 7 to 10. Councillor Burton.
I did notice that there's the free version. Includes
and that is helpful, but I think it's probably still useful to have. I know you weren't suggesting otherwise, yeah. Yes, indeed, yeah, thank you. Next recommendation, and I know the exec member has said that we're strive to do this anyway, but I think it's good to get it down, is to ask the relevant executive members to go above minimum standards or minimum guidance wherever possible and highlight why that isn't possible whenever it isn't possible. Because there will be those cases when it just isn't possible. But I think it's fair to say that sometimes minimum guidance or government guidance isn't always sufficient, and we come across that in various forms of council life. Any objections? Councillor Fenton.
In terms of minimum standards, are we talking about sort of government guidance requires X, but we should always aim to meet it or exceed it wherever possible? Is that
I think it's what I'm saying. Yeah. So government guidance, for example, the 150 metre distance for displaced blue badge parking, it'd be good to go. You know, not beyond that, lower than that, but beyond what that guidance is asking for. It's not always going to be possible, but I think it's important for the public record that we acknowledge that 150 metres is still, for some residents, yeah, indeed, too far. Councillor Mason, you mentioned something about being able to respond as a councillor. So that's lacking currently.
Yeah, the options are, if you click as responding as a professional, there's no option for councillors, it's just council officers or local authority officers, I think it calls them.
Okay.
So yeah, if there was a local elected member option or something.
I'm happy with that. I mean, you have a plethora of officers to email, of course, but it's good to get it in officially, isn't it? I'm not sure how quite to word this, so please help me out, colleagues. Touches on this point of our upcoming, merge with North Yorkshire, and how it'd be helpful wherever possible to start that collaboration now before they combine. And I note that work is already taking place, but if we can communicate that wherever it's happening with North Yorkshire colleagues, and do it on aspects of the transport plan where it isn't currently taking place, I think that would be helpful, especially in protecting it against future political whims of any future mayor. If we can say we've worked with North Yorkshire already, as I say, I note that work's already sort of taken place, but it'd be good to have that more overtly presented, I think. Councillor Hook.
Yeah, and highlight development of the synergies between the two with having,
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware there will be a scrutiny and governance structure set up for the new combined authority as well, which will involve a bit like the West Yorkshire Combined Authority now, with its scrutiny structures drawn in from York and North Yorkshire councillors. So that is definitely there will be one on transport for that, presumably. So that's definitely something we can use to consider making the case as we discussed earlier.
Any opportunities we get, really, and sort of building off that. Appreciate everyone's patience. If I've captured members' contributions roughly accurately, a desire for more focus on movement within communities, between communities, particularly around the edges of the city, the rural parts of the city, a heightened focus on that from what we currently have in front of us. Is that fair, colleagues? It's a bit wordy, I know. Robert, you'll do a fine job finessing it. The point that I made about trying to get the police's involvement into this work wherever it's appropriate, I think would be helpful. I know that they have totally different priorities, and for them it's law enforcement, but they have a role in transport decisions. So if we can find a way of plugging the police into this work wherever it's useful, I think that would be helpful. Colleagues, okay with that recommendation? We've covered language. I've probably omitted others, not intentionally. Councillor Fenton, you had a list. I know Councillor Kilburn was happy to roll with them anyway.
No, I think you've covered most of them in terms of, and others I'm sure will be kind of considered. There was the thing about being more explicit about the benchmark here, where we talk about a certain percentage reduction in X, being a bit clearer, whether it's a footnote or something, just so that it builds on what Julian was saying around maybe breaking down that percentage in terms of what it would mean on a year-by-year basis, but something that gives you a sense of what the reference point is.
So more detail on targets.
I suppose context for targets.
Okay, greater context for targets, including starting points where we're currently at.
So I think inevitably that we will have to do that. So we will have to say our target is to increase by 50% from 2019, or and that means we move from this to this, and it means that this level of change is needed in each year. So we'll bring that to the executive member session.
Thank you. And Councillor Merritt.
The issues I raised on public transport. Can we pick up the issues I raised on public transport in terms of the import and potential consultation on the principles of single integrated ticketing system for all bus services, or integrated timetabling, particularly evenings, early mornings and Sundays when services are less frequent, and a daily fares cap.
Okay, yeah, so this recommendation, and I'll try and word that, is to ask the executive members to work with officers on looking at how, what was integrated ticketing systems and timetabling.
It was about the consulting and that being a principle in the plan for single ticketing system, maximum daily fares cap, so that if you're doing 2 bus journeys to get to work or whatever, you've got a maximum fare, same as in London, 4 quid or whatever it is. It's 5 quid now. And integrated timetabling, particularly on early mornings, evenings and Sundays, so that in effect it encourages cross-city, take-up of cross-city bus journeys. Problem at the moment is the bus system's basically the same as it was 50 years ago. It's designed to take you to and from the city centre, but actually the city centre's vastly changed. Large areas of employment, leisure facilities, shopping in locations other than the city centre. You need a network that serves the dispersed area, and because of current bus frequencies, unless you integrate the timetables, it's very difficult to make those cross-city journeys outside weekday daytime hours at the moment.
I'm very agreeable to the point, Councillor Merritt. Councillor Kilbane, you had your hand up.
I guess, yeah, it's kind of just a couple of points really. One is consulting on things that are ultimately at the moment outside of our power in terms of, the first cap that we've got is both national and the integrated ticketing systems can happen, but that's happening through BSIP, which is sort of time specific funding. So you just want to be clear that while we can do a lot, we are working on those things now and they're happening now. They might be time specific, some of them, and integrated bus services. I think we're now starting to talk about franchising the buses. So if putting bus franchising into the policy areas was something that the committee wanted, then explicitly, then we could do it. But it's the only way you're going to get it integrated is by telling them where and when they've got to go.
Councillor Merritt.
Part of the government's bus strategy that came out under Johnson was in effect for these this enhanced bus partnership, and those were issues that enhanced bus partnerships can look at and try and achieve. Now, obviously, you need the operators' cooperation. Whether you get that's another matter, but there's no reason why it cannot be delivered through the existing mechanisms if we can manage to work cooperatively and achieve that. And it's in bus operators' interests at the end of the day. If they want to grow the passenger market in an increasingly dispersed city, then they have to do things differently. And we know the evidence in terms of what makes bus services more attractive. We've talked about reliability as number one, but it's those other types of things that are also equally important to have a service that actually I don't need to use the car today. I'm quite happy to use a local bus service to get to where I want on this particular occasion.
Thanks, Councillor Merritt. I mean, I guess it's important to remember that I don't mean to downplay the committee, but these are only recommendations. And, I'm comfortable with finding a form of words that works within the authority that the council and the executive members have on those issues that you've raised. I thought you nailed a form of words when you started talking, and now we're in this position. But if members are comfortable with the thrust of what you're getting at, provided we also understand that the council hasn't got total control, or in some cases any control just yet, to do what Councillor Merritt's getting at, I'd be happy with a recommendation to be put together. Councillor Fenton, I nearly called you Fenton.
I'll answer to anything. It's probably, I suppose the recommendation is to ask officers potentially how to expand what's currently in the policy ideas to pick up or to strengthen them, to pick up some of the points Councillor Merritt raised. For example, 4.1 talks about consider alternative models such as franchising. Later on, it talks about work with stakeholders to explore multi-operator ticketing. Then talks about integrated fares policy. I think a lot of it's here. It's I don't know, maybe it's how it's presented to give that kind of thrust.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you. Could you draft a recommendation based on that discussion?
Yeah, so
it was almost there.
So you're asking James and his team to effectively have a more robust wording of commitments or?
Yeah, so clearer wording within this consultation work on integrated ticketing system, a daily bus fare cap, and the third thing, forgive me, integrated timetables. Thank you. Sorry, there's a lot to carry here, and this is an awful lot of recommendations.
Just to clarify for me, but they are actually, but are these new things we're adding, or are they in there currently?
They're sort of referred to, but we want them drawn out more in the consultation work that takes place. Obviously, the caveat being that we have restrictions on what we can and can't do. Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I feel, I think what we don't want to do is ask officers and executives to add into the consultation these things, because I don't think that you should ever consult with the public about something that you can't or aren't going to do or aren't able to do. So I think it is already there saying that this is a principle that we're, and I think, you know, all the councillors are absolutely right. We could ask them to make it much clearer that they're looking into those things. But I also think it's important to make it clear that the council can't necessarily do that, even if every resident of the City of York says they want them to.
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Merritt, did you want to come back on that?
Well, as I said, if you actually go to the government's document, that was part of the function of introducing the enhanced bus partnership. I'd make the point, you know, we do have All York tickets, which is a separate ticket from the individual bus company tickets. That is something that we negotiated as a city through the previous bus partnership on a voluntary basis. There is absolutely no reason, you know, if you have the will and you can adequately engage with the operators, that we can't achieve some of these things within our existing powers. Can't guarantee it, like we can't guarantee 95% of the rest of what's in this draft, but we can actually have a good stab at it.
Thanks, Councillor Merritt. Councillor Kilbane?
Yeah, I think we can certainly tighten up the words around it. I mean, I think it's phrased in the way that it is for those very caveats, is that it's a negotiation that you have to undertake with commercial partners who don't want to run bus services if it doesn't make a profit for them, and some bus services are never going to make a profit, and we need them to run those services. So no, it is a negotiation. So it's not something to be guaranteed, but I think we also need to be aspirational.
Yeah,
you know, so yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely, maybe just draw them out a little bit more.
Thanks for that, Councillor Kilbane. Any other Councillor Stewart?
Thank you. Yeah, I very much agree with Councillor Merritt's point. I think the middle bit about the maximum fare cap is obviously a bit more tricky, because where do we go with that? I mean, you can say, yeah, £100 or £1, or the level is clearly the be all and end all, but the other 2 points are absolutely crucial. And I think that's where we've got to take the discussion a bit further on. I know obviously Councillor Kilbane said he fully expects a Labour mayor. If hypothetically the Conservatives did win, hypothetically they won that, I could say that. I mean, Keane Duncan, the Conservative mayoral candidate, is very keen on the whole buses. And so I think if we have a clear narrative, and I was just actually trying to get the full council papers, because obviously there was the amendment to the Conservative motion, which did go into more detail about what we want to see bus-wise from the new mayor. So we have got that quite, you know, approved by full council at quite a high level of quite high demands that we're sort of making. So I think we can definitely go into sort of detail, because, you know, we can obviously talk about, well, we want more joined up thinking on buses or something like that, but that's very cliche. But what does it look like? And for me, it has to look like the timetables going together, you know, the ticketing, the thing about you know, the Councillor Hook said how things relate to, and I would say a big thing is more people being taken to park and ride sites, so they can then, you know, go, and that's a proper sort of hub, isn't it? So I think those are the tangibles that we in York should say that we want.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Helpful. Do we have any further recommendations? We've already, Councillor Burton.
Just once again to reiterate about inclusivity and accessibility. Yeah,
In a total sense or on a
Yeah.
specific?
Well, total sense, really. And especially with consultations and specialists coming in to make sure that the specialist group has a disabled person on their panel.
Ah, yes. So what were they called again?
Well, that was the multi-get report, but any, hang on a minute,
Independent safety auditing?
yes, it was
it,
the
independent safety.
and safety auditing, yeah, make sure they have a disabled person or persons on their committees.
Yes.
On their panels to ensure that this is all looked at with an inclusive eye.
Yeah, I'm totally in support of that, and I would say persons, not person. So we, and I'm not saying this is what would happen, but we don't have a situation where it just looks like we have a token disabled person. So I'm comfortable with that being a recommendation. Any more from colleagues? No, okay. Well, in that case, I want to say thank you all for the discussion. Obviously, it's now gone 8:20, so my feelings of feeling awkward and mean for saying don't give speeches, I've actually gone out the window, because it would be even longer if we didn't limit ourselves to questions. Sorry? Yes, fair enough. I'm waffling now. So that brings this item to an end. Thank you, and thanks to officers and executive members for your contributions too. Really look forward to seeing how this goes. The next item is the work plan. So next up, we've got 2 items there's an economy theme. We're looking at progress on the economic strategy that was passed, I think, near the end of the last administration. Councillor Healy.
Very much, Chair. It's not specifically on the work plan. I'd like to suggest a task and finish group of a much smaller subsection of the committee to look at what the aims for LTP3 were, what were the outcomes, with specific reference around behavioural change and how we measured those.
Okay.
And the reason I suggest that is that going back 8 years ago, I did a scrutiny report around waste. And it was behavioural change around encouraging people to reduce their waste and do more recycling.
Yeah.
There was no real monitor.
Sorry, Councillor Healy, bear with me one moment. Is everything okay?
A lot of members of the public just went the wrong way.
Right. We've had a. We're
We're
just wondering where the public have gone. The entire public. Once again, apologies to the millions watching at home for this brief interlude. So we just want to make sure the members of the public get out the building in the right and safe way. Late night drama at West offices. We'll wait for the Democratic Services Officer to return.
To watch.
Yes. Have there ever been awkward silences on the live stream?
Yeah. Perhaps we should thank both members of the public for watching.
Okay, we're almost able to resume. No need to apologise. Very, very attentive, Robert. Right, Councillor Healy.
Anyway, as I was saying, so I looked at waste recycling. So it was a piece of work done on a targeted area around increasing waste recycling, which was great. They did a piece of work and they noticed waste recycling increased. What they didn't do was anything around that activity to actually monitor how long it lasted for. So they did a piece of work, waste recycling went up for 3 months, and after 3 months, it was basically back to where it was before. So that activity, it was brought to the executive, and you might have been on it, Dave, at that time, pointed out to them that this activity had taken place, that had cost them money, but in essence, hadn't met its objective, which seemed to be quite eye-opening to certainly the leader at that time, as he was really poo-pooed the idea, and the end of it, he was going, actually, that's a good point. So we're just about to do LTP4. We've done LTP3. It's coming to a natural conclusion. That had aims. We should now be able to say, okay, it's set out to do this. It's achieved this. We tried to change behavior in these ways, and we spent this money on it. What worked and what didn't work? And feed that, not feed it back, but highlight that to the executive members, and also say, when you set these things up, you need to have something in there so you can determine success or failure. Because that seems to be missing from a lot of activities that we do in the council. We don't define success, we then don't measure it, and then we don't take note of whether we've succeeded or failed. It seems to be doing the activity is almost the goal in itself.
See what you mean, Councillor Merritt?
Paul is quite right. If you go back to LTP3, I'm going to half give you the answer already. There were quite a lot. There were quite a lot of targets set in it, and there was meant to be monitoring of those. And before I was re-elected to the council, when I was on the Civic Trust's transport group, we did a review of LTP3, and what we discovered when we kept asked the questions about where's the data that you were meant to be monitoring, in effect, because of staff shortages and all the rest of it, half of that data hadn't been collected, and therefore you won't be in a position, even if you do set up a subgroup, to actually get to the bottom of the question because the data has not been collected.
In on itself probably needs highlighting.
Yes, my question would be, given what Councillor Merritt said, it still needs highlighting. Does it need a task group to do that highlighting? I mean, task groups, I'm fairly relaxed about them because it comes down to, do we have members who want to put the work in together versus other demands on our time? I'm aware that in our work planning meetings in the summer, we did loosely sort of say we should do a couple of other task groups on other subjects. So one of them was looking at management of grass verges, for example, and I'd still like us to consider that, as very granular as it is. So what I'm minded to ask is, could we have a specific item on the next meeting agenda where we can consider, if you like, pitches for task groups from this committee? So we have the couple from the summer. I can't remember what the second one was. I know one was about grass verges. You've got your suggestion here. Might be worth checking out of officers what the value of it would be, given Councillor Merritt's response there. And then as a committee, we can hopefully pick one or two task groups.
Okay. I was considering it was probably going to be Councillor Merritt and I that did it. So
take care, Councillor Mason.
See you, Ashley.
But yeah, I mean, look, I'm happy to. I think it'd be better if we all and the public had a sort of sight of a mini pitch, no more than a side of A4, not just on that, but the other ideas that were raised in the summer, because it'd be a shame to let them go. Councillor Merritt, and then let's try and wrap up if we can.
I think the important point is to look forward. The exec members committed this evening in response to one of the questions that there is going to be proper monitoring of this new plan. And James made the point that we're going to have to do this new LTP differently from previous. There's going to have to be monitoring so that if it goes adrift, we know it and can change course, do different things. So I think the key issue for us as a scrutiny committee is when they come back, as was promised in a few months' time, with the more specific proposals and the proposed monitoring, we need to very closely question to make sure the resources are going to be there, that they've agreed a sensible set of targets. The resources are going to be there to properly monitor them so that that does happen this time. Because as I say, unfortunately, it didn't last time.
Councillor Nelson.
Why don't you propose a task and finish group of yourself and Councillor Merritt for 2 years' time or 3 years' time or whenever? Well, actually, I don't know how long it'll take for any of this to get going, but I think that's a really good point about looking forward. And if we know that there were those mistakes that have been made in the past or things that haven't been done properly in the past that inhibit the data we have now, rather than expend loads of energy on that, use that as a starting point for how we make sure it doesn't go awry this time and put our energies. I'm saying ours, yours. Just
Thanks, Councillor Nelson. I think there's obviously a discussion here. If you still want to put a pitch forward for that in the next meeting, not to disregard what's been raised, I think you should take that into account because if you're doing a task group, it needs to be worth the time because we're all run ragged as members. But let's have an item on the next agenda to look at task groups because we did have 1 or 2 items also raised in the summer, and it'd be good to get. Yeah, it was before. I don't know why it's not on this document, but look, we can pick it up. What we discussed in the summer hasn't been lost. Councillor Stewart, you had a hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just about the work plan. So obviously, as you say, thousands of people are watching this meeting at home, and they look to us as I can't remember what the name of the committee is, economy, place, and everything like that, as their main transport resource. I'm just really conscious that we don't look, as far as I'm aware, at any of these transport strategies again until they appear at full council in 5 months. Correct? Yep. We've done our work, haven't we, on this as a committee?
We can always change.
Well, okay, so that's going to be my point. So basically, I think we should have this on our work plan. Now, obviously, tonight was a sort of, the big night and everything like that. We had all the 4 or 5 officers and the executive members. But we're going to have the consultation kick off. We're going to have lots of stages of that consultation, and there's going to be all sorts of things coming through. Officers are then going to look at that work, but also as members, we're going to hear all sorts of feedback and we're going to have all sorts of thoughts. So my suggestion would be that we do have it on our work plan again so that we can give an update to executive on our thoughts. Nothing hugely formal. I'm saying, not saying, oh crikey, we must change a consultations response that an officer must have the report, but we go on what information there is, because when it comes to full council, the quality of debate is going to be absolutely non-existent, and that's where we're going to sign it off. And this, I think, has been quite a good discussion tonight in terms of cross-party people giving different views. So just to have it on our work plan, and obviously with a ruthless and firm chair, he will, direct it and steer it. And so we're not going to be wasting time meandering everywhere. So I just think having it on the work plan would be a good thing.
I hear you, Councillor Stewart. I mean, look, I'd be happy for it to come back to this committee. What I don't want to worry about just now is when exactly that is. It might be before April, but as you can see, we have a full programme. We can add it to. We have a sort of. It's not a wish list, is it? It's a sort of other things we can consider list beyond what's penciled in. We can add it to that. And then between ourselves, agree on the right time to bring it back, because, there could be all sorts that come out the wash in this consultation. It might be right to bring it back in March. It might be right to do it a little bit later.
It goes to full council in March, doesn't it? So that's when it gets signed off. So unless we're going to look at the developments to it, in practice, it would just, obviously November would be too soon. So it would potentially be the January or February meeting now, where all I'm saying is we as a cross-party group have a look at it. You don't have to set it in stone now at all.
Yeah.
You know, it could just be having a view to one of the January or February meetings, having a look at it. I just think that would be a good thing. Because at the moment, the perception will be that this committee's done its work. You know, yeah, exactly. Whereas just have that discussion again, I think would be a good thing.
Councillor Burton?
Just an idea, and I might be very unpopular. Could we have a separate session and a supplementary session on this then? Because I think it is important. I think you're right.
I mean, look, I'm all for it. It comes down to resource and what this committee can receive. Look, can you let me say that I hear you? It'd be good to have it back. Let's add it to the sort of other items bit for now. And then at the next meeting, we could have a discussion about when we put it in, if we do put it back in, and what we're going to drop to make room for it. Or can we have a further meeting on it? I don't know if that's possible. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you again. Just one final point, because you know my view is absolutely predicated on not creating other work for officers. So if there's something there, we get it attached on our PDFs and everything like that. But if there isn't, we're not changing any deadlines at all. And in terms of what we give up, genuinely, I think we give up EastEnders or whatever it may be. It's just a meeting that's an hour longer or half an hour longer, and that's all we're in it for, isn't it? To try and do stuff. Is it EastEnders tonight? I don't know what.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And as I say, I'm up for it. But let's just add it to the other items thing for now, and we'll come back to it. But I think it's a fair point. It's a big deal, so we should try and have another look at it at the most appropriate opportunity before it's too late. Councillor Fenton.
This is a more general work plan comment, if that's okay.
Sure.
Not a long-winded one. We've got devolution on the 28th of November. It might be worth us having a conversation outside the meetings, and at CSMC we were meant to have a devolution item on the 27th of November, but further to conversations with officers about the pace at which governance arrangements for the combined authority are coming through. We're thinking we might defer that because we might not have the information we need. But if we keep in touch to make sure we kind of complement one another in terms of what's discussed here, what's discussed at CSMC.
Yeah. That's a good shout, Councillor Fenton. Thank you. Because that might in itself free up a bit of wiggle room in what we've got here. Are we okay to wrap that item up, guys? And I don't have any urgent business. Let's call it a night. Thank you so much to the officers who stayed late. It's hugely appreciated. And thanks to members for your contributions tonight. I think it's been a